Section 18 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 15. The observatory, an odd circular building all turrets and balconies, capped the summit of a lofty mountain, which rose abruptly out of the lovely bay surrounding the freak city of Centaur. The mystic, enchanting quality of this solitary mountain, with its dense forest of stunted trees and towering fort of science, fired the imagination with unwholesome ambition to accomplish grand impossibilities, and I longed to pierce the unknown and reveal the hidden light that gleams through the day and night. I told Saunders of my singular emotions. He sighed sympathetically and suggested astronomy, that impenetrable science which calms despondency in a profound realization of the sublime vastness of nothing. The marvels revealed through colossal telescopes fascinated me. Viewing countless worlds swirling through space, strange unknown planets bounding from dark obscurity, great globes of vapory fire churning for centuries and centuries, belching gigantic flashes, incited me to wild speculation, which ended in a positive conviction of the habitation of the moon. This great wan sphere to telescopic vision appeared like a far distant landscape. Lofty mountains, wide plains lined with flickering silvery spaces, were sharply outlined against a vast area of vapory whiteness, which alternated dark and light flaring at intervals, almost transparent. There is atmosphere, life, habitation upon the moon. The interesting planet was suddenly enveloped in a far-reaching roseate mist, drifting from the east, which flared in a wide arch of splendor, vibrating spiked streamers of violet brilliancy. And from the depths of this tinging glory, Saunders' weird, beautiful star slowly glided into view, absorbing the ruddy reflection, till reaching the zenith, the strange fiery disk glimmered with a deepening, unflinching pink, and I discovered Saunders' star was very trying to the eyes, yet the swift changing surface of the freakish planet fascinated. Amazed, I watched the intense rose nebulous gradually pale, then lift, revealing a luminous mottled globe, circled with a hoop of livid green flame which darkened ominously. A great black spot slowly widened, spread, and engulfed the strange orbit, which silhouetted against the flashing circle shone distinct, round as our globe. It was a remarkable sight, but a sudden sharp pain through the eyes abruptly ended observations. I blinked against the thousands of crimson and violet discs that assail those who have looked too long at the sun, and finally sought relief in frequent cold bandages and rest. Casually mentioning the matter to Saunders, he testily advised me not to do it again, give up astronomy, and return to Centaur, suggesting that I be quick about it. He didn't want to be bothered. I informed him of the result of my observations, to wit, that his phenomenal discovery was naught but a great mass of congealed vapor, subject to constant disturbances, and would eventually evaporate. Saunders argued conscientiously, bringing out maps, conducting me over zigzag astral routes, and explaining that at intervals the mystic planet underwent semi-eclipse. But had observations been continued, I would have noticed the oblong pink nebulous soar above the dark obstruction, and caught a glimpse of an exquisite roseate scenery that was instantly obscured in thick, rolling, fiery clouds. I let him do most of the talking. He was more up on the subject than I. But his explanations were long, tedious, and thoroughly wearied me. I decided to give up astronomy. Yes, sir, I had all I wanted of astronomy, but insisted that my suppositions were as acceptable as any. No one knows more about it than the other, which is a mercy. The science is an unfathomable mystery, guesswork. We are one in trillions, the neighboring lights wandering for eternity as we do, and forming all manner of wild conclusions. I soon discovered the stargazing clique regarded Saunders much as the National Geographical Societies regarded Sheldon. Saunders was not considered a crank exactly, but he was primitive, ludicrous. His statements, theories, were received with suppressed merriment. For diversion, the wise ones propounded the most impossible problems, till Saunders, like the scientist who once driven almost mad, trying to solve the unsolvable, seized his grandson and burdened the undeveloped mind with the improbable. The simple straightforwardness of tender faculties, foreign of worry, shredded intricacies, and revealed the emptiness of all mysteries. In this manner, Saunders patiently answered all queries, and at the same time delivered himself of a rare truth. A scientist, he informed them, will sometimes, in the course of experiment, chance upon a meteoric speck problem, which immediately he buries deep beneath a heap of scientific rubbish. Then an absorbed contemplation of shadows that stretch inquiringly forgets all about it. A mighty problem develops with flickering memory, and in a vain attempt to recall what is lost forever, researchers are invited to delve into that which takes centuries of martyred concentration to realize. Wasted inspiration never returns. Occasionally in this life, the problem seeker is rewarded. Then he wonders why, and if it was worth a life of probing. "I don't blame them," said Saunders confidentially. "It is a wise man who makes of every task diversion. To some extent, I suppose I represent what they were centuries ago, and the wide difference that does exist they chose to overlook. But I'll accomplish in less than 3 months what they've been experimenting upon with failure for over 50 years. And Saunders was not at all deceived how he stood with the clientele. Of one thing I was positive: Sachs, dear old Sachs, was equal to his surroundings. His domineering intellect commanded respect, and had no superior. How I was regarded by these wise men did not concern me. They were too advanced to meet my views, and interested me as little as I did then. Before returning to Centaur, I thoroughly explored the strange mountain island. Declining to descend in the pulley coaches, which darted down the mountainside at regular intervals, I made my way to a narrow footpath, hewed in the rocks by centuries of travel. I was accompanied part of the way by one of the professors, who, probably anxious to be rid of me, suddenly decided I didn't interest him nohow, and with remarkable speed returned to the summit. I was glad the old boy and his prosy talk were out of the way, as both had frequently made me lose my footing, and having reached a point where the path widened and travel was made easier by natural steps formed in the cliffs, I was soon upon level ground, a broad open road about 50 feet wide circling the base of the mountain like a racetrack, and enclosed with a high fortress-like wall. Perched haphazardly among the cliffs were odd-looking, mound-shaped stone huts, painted in all the soft tints of the rainbow. The effect was ridiculously like a huge toy, a great cone of giant marbles. I walked entirely around the mountain before encountering anything alive, and had decided to make a second trip, when just ahead, advancing rapidly, I spied the figure of a woman, tall, lithe, graceful. I hastened forward, then stopped, gasped, and bared my head before the lovely child, for she was little more. She stopped also and gazed at me with frank, curious eyes. A faint smile curved the perfect mouth. The face was bewitching in its undeveloped, innocent beauty. She held out her hand in welcome. "Your name?" she asked. "With pleasure," I responded. "And yours?" "Abella," she answered simply. "But I was sure you were the Virgilius. I never heard of With Pleasure before." She laughed merrily, and beneath the searching hazel eyes my face flushed. "I am Virgilius," I hastened to inform her. "Virgilius Salucci." "The Virgilius," she cried in triumph. "I knew I could not be mistaken." "Ah," she sighed ecstatically, "the Virgilius, he who braved the dead north, that he might see the women of Centauri and impel them to revive the lost art." This was one way of putting it, but not exactly what I crossed the pole for. I gazed with bold admiration at the beautiful young woman. She seemed unaware of my warm glances, and as she took my arm, smilingly inviting me to go with her, no mock-modest blush marred the delicate transparency of her skin. The women of Centauri do not blush. They have nothing to blush for. Abella led me to the side of the mountain facing Centaur, then escorted me up a long flight of steps and into one of the huge emerald-tinted marbles. A man, busy mending fishnets, glanced up as we entered, then hurriedly advanced to meet us. Abella gently pushed me forward and presented the Virgilius to her husband. He greeted me cordially. A massive fellow, head and shoulders above me, and I a tall man. A fine man, but how did he come by such a lovely wife? For, according to the matrimonial system of this land, these two were not mates. Abella, aside from the peerless Alpha, was the loveliest morsel of femininity I had seen in this land of beautiful women. I contrived to see a great deal of her during my stay at the observatory. I would descend to the village in the early morning, and not return to the summit till the stars were out. I sketched the girl in many poses. Features such as hers could be naught but beautiful, however criminal the artist, and became very friendly with the husband, a typical Centaurian, whose password was equality. This brawny fisherman had a wonderful flow of language. His intelligence was deep. He knew when he had talked enough, a science many have still to master on our side of the world. The man was a magnificent specimen of the strange, soulless nature of his race. Under circumstances that would have driven me mad with doubt and irritation, he was calm, serene. He permitted his young, lovely wife to spend hours in the society of one famous as Cupid. Distorted in his mind, love was a grotesque, fantastic bauble, a fabulous folly. Yet he claimed love was not altogether unknown to him. It filled a good space in the history of his ancestors, and during childhood, when the nights were long and wintry, he had been greatly diverted with charming, impossible tales of tenderness. He frankly told me my undertaking was most difficult. Love could not be resurrected. The dead were dead forever. My tuition was undoubtedly excellent, and possibly I possessed the approved modern methods, but he knew the women of Centauri, and they would tire of the study ere they mastered the rudiments. Only once did he exhibit any warmth or enthusiasm, and were I not positive he was incapable of passion, I would have declared him enamored with the priestess of the sun. Her name, accidentally mentioned, inspired ecstasy. She was divine, and he worshipped her. But between love and worship, there is a universe of difference. His wife presented the inevitable. She was his affinity, his mate, his fate. He was not indifferent, but she was not divine. They led a smooth, even, contented life together, and I am willing to wager he never cursed his idiocy for wedding, nor did she wonder daily what had become of her reason at the critical period. But in this strange, unnatural world, the old Italian adage is worn threadbare. A woman is beautiful till she crosses the threshold of her husband's home. Then she's good all the rest of her days. Translation ruinous. The artistic but practical fisherman had, before possession, appreciated the ravishing beauty of Abella. These people did not differ so much from us. True, we could love, but preferred not to, whereas they were bereft of inclination. Still, the grand finale was marvelously similar. Possession killed desire. I had the audacity to show Abella some of my sketches. She examined them critically, and as the Centaurians are devoid of passion, so are they above deceit. This simple little fisher girl told me I was not an artist, that my work was crude and lacked character. She took me to her brilliant, overturned teacup of a home, and showed me some of her crayons and pastels. The artist had a bold, strong stroke, rather remarkable in a woman, but taken all in all, Abella did not excel in art any more than I did. Landscape was her forte, as it is with all women. At once I recognized the artistically crooked lines trailing across the faint horizon. Women are more clever than men. They rarely attempt what is beyond them. Continual failure, due to overtaxation of capabilities, is entirely a masculine trait. I was quite frank with Abella, and she was wonderfully patient. Women of my world ostracize unfavorable criticism. The spontaneous critic embroils and is always a bore. Abella told me she lacked talent, but that she was beautiful. And how do you know? I asked stupidly. My husband is the most famous artist in the world, and he has told me. Excellent, I cried. If that mode were only popular in my land, vice would become extinct. But we have not mastered the divine power of resistance. We shrivel in egotism, and love, the genuine thrill is as much a myth in my land as in yours, is recognized as the most malignant form of insanity. Marriage is the remedy which produces merciful reaction. Truly are the men of Centauri wise. Their wives are ever beautiful, though unloved. Abella threw up her hands. How very strange, and how very unhappy you all must be, she cried. The dear child. So interesting to converse with one who cannot understand. Beautiful, tedious, the two always go together. Yet I had been detained a week. Undaunted by Abella's frankness, I offered my sketches to the artist-fisherman for examination. He smiled indulgently, looked them over, and desired them all, offering in return any one from his wonderful collection. I agreed and followed him to the top of his mound-shaped home, entering a room strong with the odor of oil and paint. It was the workshop of an artist. A studio is quite another place. Near the window, upon an easel, was a half-finished painting of sky, storm clouds, with a background of thunderous, rolling, flame-tinged vapor, the sudden red of a storm sun that no artist has yet mastered. The picture was powerfully impressive. The fisherman was a master, his aim, individuality. But I could not admire his ideal of feminine beauty. He was the creator of a type, elongated, somber, gaunt, thick-lipped. Yet in these impossible faces was that which could not be found in one woman's face in all of Centauri: soul. The artist had a cunning skill. He was able to depict that which he lacked. I looked in vain for a trace of the delicate loveliness of his wife, but in all the work scattered about the walls, there was not one sketch of Abella. He asked me if I had noticed his work in the salon. I told him I had not yet visited the salon. My work is conspicuously hung, he informed me. You cannot overlook any of it. I am the only painter in Centauri who refrains from defacing canvases with initials. I come from a long line of artists. Necessity made us fishermen. Yet each in his time was the foremost painter of his age. I am that today. Success is the heritage. Those divinely gifted with genius strive for fame, glory alone. To barter that speck of gold which the sun's rays burned in us is sacrilegious. Soul, blind my eyes forever to your golden brilliancy. I would as soon think of selling my wife, Abella. And when you have reached fame, glory, what? I asked. You do not understand, he quickly replied. It is not momentary fame we seek. Immortal fame is the goal we all strive for. But all who are famous cannot be immortal, yet each believe immortality the just reward. Even Alpha, the superb, yearns for immortal fame, and is wasting her gorgeous youth in the effort. He turned to a huge stone chest or vault set in the wall. Unbolting the door, he invited me to enter. There was sufficient light from the outer room, and I saw shelves reaching from floor to ceiling, laden with parchment canvases carefully covered with oil silk. Stored on those shelves are rare works of art representing the endless toil of my ancestors, explained the fisherman. All were famous, but one only attained immortality. You have been to the museum? He asked, drawing down a small canvas from an upper shelf. Possibly you saw this picture while there. It is a portrait of Alpha I. This is the original, he continued. History tells us Alpha I reigned during the era of love, and the renowned painter Francesco was deeply enamored with her. But in a mood of exaltation she renounced love and went in bondage to culture, and Francesco the painter died of a wounded heart. Culture opened a new epoch in this great world of ours, but brought down malignant wrath upon Alpha I, who, being advanced beyond her era, ignored the petulance of inferiors. To her, the Centaurians are indebted for the grand, vigorous race of today. Alpha I did not long survive Francesco the artist, whose reward for deep suffering and anguish is immortality. I became deeply interested in the many treasures stored in the Iron Room, but the work of the living artist surpassed them all. He threw up his arms and laughed when I asked to see some of his sketches of Abella. She is beautiful, but does not inspire, he told me. I fail when I attempt to portray Abella. Life, animation is her beauty. Repose, the death mask. Landscape is beautiful on canvas, but never reaches the beauty of reality. Those women up there that I know you do not admire have made me famous. He referred to the gaunt, dark-visaged ideal. All Centauri recognizes them as the type of a perverted age, he continued, showing this race has lived through and conquered degeneration. Those faces are arch, subtle, perfectly beautiful. To study them is fascinating. The scowling brows arch, the eyes take deeper tinges, and the lips, I turned away, smiling, muttering in jest. He advised me when I returned to Centaur to visit the salon. There I would find a portrait of Abella, which impressed but gave dissatisfaction, lacking that which made Abella a beautiful woman. He opened an exquisitely carved cabinet, and taking out an oblong leather case, remarked that this was some of his first work. Then, without warning, he thrust before me a portrait of Alpha Centauri. I gasped. Skill. Powers above. Alpha Centauri stood before me, marvelously beautiful, enveloped in a broad stream of golden light, devout, with eyes and arms raised heavenward, in the temple of the sun. I am not certain how I acted. Men in love are usually maudlin. I had been away a long time, must return, must see, speak with her at once. I implored, begged for the portrait. The man stared at me in amazement. then quietly closed the case and pressed my hand upon it. The picture was mine. He pitied, yet could not understand. As we parted, he murmured, "Very unfortunate. Great passion wasted. The women of the great family are sacred. The men only mate." He invited me to call again, hoping that I would find leisure from my many engagements to promise him at least one visit before returning to my own country. His seeming sincerity was very complimentary. Flattery is a strong point with the Centaurians. I found Abella waiting for me in the vestibule, seated in a wide, deep-silled window overlooking the bay. Beautiful Abella. She had ceased to interest me. "You have been long," she murmured, "but the work is wonderful." "Your husband is a master," I replied. She looked happy, gratified, and asked me to be seated, pointing to the place beside her. I declined, then with the brutality of indifference, told her I was going, would return to Centaur that evening. "So soon?" she gasped, a startled expression coming to the sweet eyes. Then she turned aside and in cold tones told me she regretted my departure. It was enough. I should have gone, but the situation tantalized gallantry. No man could have left her like that. I drew the girl to me and slowly raised her arms till they rested around my neck. "Abella," I whispered, "you are sad that I go?" She raised the lovely eyes brimful of tears. The sweet mouth with its full red lips quivered, drooped, and was very close. "Abella," I murmured. Then our lips met in a long, long kiss. Her first kiss of love. Ah, but she was beautiful. With a low cry, she darted from me, and with her face well averted, bade me go. "Go," she muttered. "Go to Alpha Centauri." With the name of the woman I worshipped, reason returned. Without a word, I left her forever. Abella was completely forgotten in the exciting events that followed. Possibly I acted wrong, but was innocent of harm and did none. True, Abella had met with an experience few women of Centauri ever encounter, but I knew her brilliant eyes would be dimmed but a few minutes after my departure, and in a very little time I would cease to be anything but a remembrance, a pleasant remembrance, circling in dreamy mist till submerged, obliterated. Abella and all the women of this strange land are devoid of depth, which is the secret of their great beauty. Nothing affected them. The perfect surface challenged contact with the cold hardness of gems. Ills glanced aside, leaving a placid, flawless mask. I shall always remember Abella, but knew she had forgotten me long before I left her wonderful and unnatural world. End of section 18.
Section 19 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 16. Saunders, whom I had not seen for several days, met me as I returned to the observatory. Undoubtedly one of his pet experiments had gone awry, for he was peevish and spoiling for a fight. He very frankly informed me he didn't want me around anymore, that arrangements were completed to start that evening upon a gigantic piece of work, and no idlers wanted. "And I've spied the attraction," he snapped. "Clear out. This is no place for such tomfoolery." "But Saunders," I interrupted. "Nonsense," he cried. "Don't deny it. I won't have any tomfoolery around here." "Oh, bosh. I return to Centaur tonight anyhow," I told him. "And no harm done. They're different here." "Tomfoolery, all tomfoolery," he grumbled, shaking his head obstinately. An hour later, in company with a number of gentlemen, I boarded a ship bound for Centaur. Saunders puttered around for fear by some mishap I might be left behind. But when we were ready to start, he affectionately clasped my hand and informed me that I was used to his crabbedness, and that it was out of gear for a crusty old chap to be in sympathy with nonsense. If his plan succeeded, he would be detained at the observatory only a month. Then it was his intention to travel. He wanted me to run over to see him whenever I had spare time. I promised in order to get him off the ship, as he delayed departure. We reached Center early in the evening. The city, brilliant with lights, presented a gala appearance. The glowing houses were gaudily festooned with banners and greens, and from all floated the colors of Centauri. The streets were canopied with flags formed in arches. When I reached the palace, I knew some great event was taking place. The immense building was ablaze with lights, and draped across the stately entrance, swaying gracefully in the light breeze, was a flag of yellow shimmering material with a huge black crescent cutting the center. The gardens were crowded with courtiers and guards, who pranced and swaggered in gay, fantastic costumes. I was observed at once, and way was made for me. I heard my name carried from lip to lip, and was gazed at with curiosity, bordering on impertinence. In the usually deserted halls of the palace stalked bold, dashing cavaliers, who saluted me respectfully as I entered, but uttered irreverent undertones, which they thought I could not understand. In confusion I stumbled over my own feet, then became enraged at the cruel guffaws only half suppressed. With relief I spied Mike's familiar face as he hurried to meet me, and with unnecessary speed rushed me to my apartments and immediately proceeded with my toilet. I was shaved, anointed, curled, my hands dipped in scented water. I felt so effeminate. "You are to present yourself at once to Alpha Centauri," said Mike, hence my haste. "She expected me to arrive this evening?" I gasped eagerly. "No," Mike answered. "She gave this order when you departed, doubtless expecting your early return, then forgot all about it. But I obey. There is great rejoicing in the city, and much doing in the palace." "What's going on?" "The king of the Vespa Belt has honored us with his long-promised visit," he replied. "The king?" I cried. "What king? I thought Centauri ruled over all this land." "He does," Mike informed me, "but not the Crescent Belt, separated from us by the great ocean, and comprising 1/3 of this half of the globe. Like the dark races, the white people have divided into two. They are wonderful, these people of the Vespa Belt, so-called, because in war they cling together and fight like hornets. But civilization is slow with them. They do not progress and are ruled by the passions. They still love, hate, and still have their king, who, however, is good, wise, and rules through kindness. He is a descendant of the resolute, daring, immortal Benliol, who abolished the army and navy. We think a great deal of the Vespa people. They regard us with affection, and in time will join us. Centauri has often visited the Vespa Belt, but this is the first time Benliol ever stepped upon Centauri soil. He has some mighty scheme, or he would never take the trip over the great ocean at his age. He greatly surprised us, heralding his approach just 12 hours ahead with gigantic flaring images of himself across a midnight sky. But we gave him a royal welcome. Centauri is with your friend, the famous Sheldon, in the Oxta Mountains. He has been apprised of the king's visit, and is expected any moment. Benliol has been with us 2 days, the guest of Alpha Centauri." "What's the mysterious motive back of the king's visit?" I asked. "The unification of the white race," answered Mike. "So you told me before," I snapped. "How does he intend to accomplish it?" "Marriage," was the monosyllabic reply. God, a sudden weakness came over me, and my head sank heavily upon the back of the chair. Mike turned aside, his action irritated me, and impatiently I bade him continue with his news and omit nothing. "The king wishes the hand of Alpha Centauri in marriage for his son, Prince Benliol. They are all Benliols, you know," Mike explained. "Should the marriage take place, the Vespas and Centauris are one, but never in the history of the great family have the feminine members mated. They are divine, and all, at a certain age, are with much pomp and festivity, publicly wedded to the sun. Alpha Centauri became the bride of the sun 10 years ago. The men of the great family mate with whom they please. The mother of Alpha was an octagona, fairer than her race and surpassingly beautiful. Progression is wonderful. It makes simple the impossible. A century ago, such a union as now contemplated would have been looked upon as sacrilegious. Now it is considered. Alpha Centauri is the last of her name. Should she die unmated, the great family becomes extinct. The marriage may take place, but the priestess of the sun is a superb enigma, unapproachable, elusive as the star which guides the destiny of her family." I ceased being a fool. Bah, the man gossiped. Yet I drank eagerly the greenish liqueur handed to me. It warmed my chilled blood. The color flushed my face, and boldly I mingled with the jolly Vespas that had invaded the palace. I hurried down the crowded rooms, oblivious of the curious glances leveled upon me. Alpha Centauri stood at the gates of her miniature forest of exotic plants and perfumed lakes. I marveled at the wondrous woman. Never had she seemed so exquisitely beautiful, gorgeously gowned, covered with blazing gems, even coiled midst the raven locks rippling to her feet, yet crowned with the dull gold cap, symbol of the sun. But the woman was changed. The glorious eyes, heavy-lidded, always veiled, now flashed with brilliant intellectuality. The sweet lips parted in a gracious smile, and her form swayed with gentle grace in conversation. Alpha Centauri was transformed into a glorious creature of the earth. The cold, repellent, mystical sphinx was no more, and it was I who had forced her from her pedestal into the pulsing, passionate arms of life. She was mine. I created her, the fabulous creature of my dreams. The ideal was realized. Fears vanished. I was confident, supreme. The force of my adoration would draw this woman to me, as now my ardent glances drew her eyes to mine. The fair face flushed, and impulsively she threw out her arms in glad welcome. I hurried to her, yet my quick glance embraced the man beside her. Father Neptune, as I live, giant in form with heavy locks and beard, gross, flushed, jolly, with sharp pale eyes that flashed intense admiration upon the lovely girl at his side. Alpha murmured a welcome as I raised her hand to my lips, then presented me to the king of the Vespa belt. He extended his hand graciously, and in condescension resembled all the little kings of my world. He spoke in a deep bass, and gave me to understand he was pleased to meet the Virgilus who came from the other side, while his sharp little eyes plainly asked, "And what the devil did you come for?" But he was an entertaining old boy, a clever raconteur. His forceful manner and rather coarse wit rolled around an eloquent tongue, compelling laughter, though one should not. He thoroughly enjoyed his own risque jests, and I never heard the finale of a racy affair wherein figured a disheveled damsel and a ship in mid-air fluttering disastrously, for sudden cheers and shouts of "Centauri!" rang from the gardens and echoed through the great halls. People crowded to the windows and into the vestibule, but the throngs hushed and parted as old Centauri entered, tall, grave, with heavy dignity. I tarried not to watch the greeting between the two great men, but drew Alpha deeper into her ethereal forest, far amid dim lights and slumbering birds, the air heavy with pungent odors of strange blossoms. She sank upon a mossy couch. With a sigh of ecstasy I flung myself at her feet. "You did miss me a little?" I asked. She smiled softly and gazed musingly at me. "Yes, a little," she finally answered. "I wanted someone to talk to who would understand. I've spent hours in idleness and dreams, yet have not wasted time. I have formed plans, brilliant plans for the future, which appears rosy and hopeful. The chill of cold facts are freed from my being. The world is brighter, gayer. I am wondrously beautiful, and have discovered there is happiness, much happiness, in foolishness. Virgilus, my whole life has changed. Now I live, and would not return to the old existence for a world full of knowledge. I am raised supreme in vast expectations. I worship, an image of my brain. I love deeply, wholly, a man I've never seen." She leaned back against a giant plant, and with voluptuously uplifted arms smiled the smile of selfishness, wrapped in her own passion, cruelly oblivious to the despair she inflicted. "Yes," she continued, "I have learned the lesson. I have mastered the science of love, the key to all emotion, the passion root of humanity, which a universe of knowledge cannot wither. Yet does my faith follow me in this new life. Soul is my God, and the God of the universe, immortality, the supreme reward. This phantom which inspires me exists. It is ordained we meet. There is a wave of emotion deeper, stronger than mine, so powerful my soul is drawn from me. I visited the laboratory this morning, the first visit in days. The valuable liquid of eternal youth had evaporated, the ingredients clung to the side of the vessels in fine powder. All was a dead loss, the work of years in ruins, yet I felt no regret, and while I mused upon the sinful waste and wondered at my indifference, I was startled by a rushing, flooding noise, and the dense white film which suddenly descended, clouding my sight, but fear quieted in silvery sweet sounds. Then gradually the mist floated, undulated, and shaped into a hovering indistinct form that beckoned. With a shriek I regained my senses. And Virgilus, though our souls met, communed in the laboratory, I imagined I was here, alone with my flowers and birds. We meet here, my affinity. I am impatient. For the second she forgot me entirely in some sweet reverie, then with a start roused herself. The lovely face changed sharply, and I was jarred by that conventional laugh that chills. She rose hastily. "Come, Virgilus," she commanded. "Return with me. We should never have dallied in this dim retreat." She hurried forward. I sprang to my feet and followed her. "Alpha," I called, catching her arm. "King Benliel, what message does he take to his son, the prince?" For an instant she seemed puzzled. Then her great eyes blazed scornfully. "I am the priestess of the sun," she cried. "I worship a god. My descendants shall unite the white races." She hurried away, and I sighed with relief, but chuckled gleefully as I thought of the chagrin of old Benliel. He and Centauri had left the hall hours ago, presumably to discuss affairs of state. I joined the group surrounding the fair priestess of the sun, and edged my way to her side. The guests were departing reluctantly. I thought they would never go, but at last Alpha and I remained alone in the great, brilliantly lit rooms. "Good night, Virgilus," she murmured, as I raised her hand to my lips. "Come on the morrow as early as you wish. I will tell you of my plans." She tried to free her hand, then smiled softly. The tender light in her eyes emboldened me. I drew her to me and flung my arms around her. "You who love so deeply and truly," I whispered, "why, Alpha, are you so cruel to me?" "Oh, you do not understand love at all," she interrupted, quickly passing from my embrace. "You do not willingly love. You were forced into it. And you love a woman. With you, love is passion, desire, recreation. You will outlive it and love as deeply again. In your mind is ample space for other thoughts. You are not my affinity. It was not destined we should mate. I adore till death, and for the sake of adoring, it is absolute. I love a god, perfect mentally, physically. Should the substance lack either perfection, it is fate, and I'll be true to the shadow. Ah, Virgilus, I am not ungrateful. I do not forget it is to you I owe this wondrous new existence, and, well, it is late. I will see you in the morning. All women have ideals. Those lacking this sweet sentiment are not worth winning. Alpha, the beauteous, was only a woman after all, passionately enamored with an ideal she would never meet. An ideal? Fiddlesticks! I inspired this passion for a shadow. Alpha Centauri is mine. I created her. End of section 19. Read by Philip Erickson, Okemos, Michigan.
Section number 20 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 17. The heat was intense. It was impossible to remain in my rooms, and my nerves were at such tension that I decided to hunt up Sax for relaxation. I knew I would find him awake and busy. He always worked at night, declaring the brain was clearer, more vigorous during the dark hours, and that all great ideas had been figured out by candlelight. I softly stepped into the hall. The dim lights flickered in a slight draught. All seemed silent. Yet distinctly a low murmur of voices reached me. I hurried down the broad vista of shining stairs. The bronze entrance stood wide as always. There were no sentinels in this wondrous land of harmony. As I neared the grand vestibule, the voices raised aloud, discordant in angry dispute, and I paused in astonishment. A brilliant light suddenly flared from the audience, or throne room, where royal magnificence defied comparison. A sultry silence, followed by the rustling of silks, warned me I had barely time to conceal myself behind the huge fluted column which supported the dome, when a door swung wide and Alpha Centauri stepped out, her bearing that of a queen, a disdainful, arrogant queen. By her side was the Vespa King, wild with rage. In the rear Centauri stood, arms uplifted in dismay and bewilderment. "At least meet Prince Benliel," snorted the angry king, trying to detain her. Alpha gazed scornfully upon him. "I do not refuse to meet the prince," she answered, "but shall be absent from Center indefinitely. However, when I return will give him an audience." "Bah!" scoffed the king, unable to control his fury. Leave the veneer for publicity. We are alone. Be natural. You must meet my son, and cold, superior as you think you are, you will—" Quickly she raised her hand, commanding silence. "Useless," she told him. "You have my decision. I am the priestess of the sun, and shall never wed." She walked slowly away. The king watched her with bulging eyes, too furious for speech. Suddenly she turned and flashed him a brilliant smile. "My greetings to Prince Benliel. Should he ever visit Center, a royal welcome awaits him." She courtesied deeply in mockery. The interview was at an end. The king stamped with rage and would have followed her, but Centauri remonstrated and drew him into the room, gently closing the door. Alpha paused, shrugged her shoulders, and glanced disdainfully at the closed door. "The Prince of the Vespa Belt. Oof," she muttered. Then she flung her arms high and whispered in adoration, "I am true, faithful, yours entirely." Her eyes closed in passionate ecstasy. A smile of exquisite joy stole over the lovely features. As in a dream she proceeded on her way. I watched till she passed from view. She had learned the lesson well. An apt pupil who had not been taught, who had never forgotten. Remembrance had tarnished. A slight pressure upon the fabulous spring, and the sensitive wires vibrated with rejuvenated vigor. "Hooray! Return to your belt, O Vespa King. Sick." Accosting the first pedestrian, I inquired the way to Professor Saxlander. Following directions, I soon reached Sax's dwelling, which was brilliantly lit from top to bottom. The house seemed all frontage, wide, flat, and very shallow. I touched a conspicuous knob. The door startled me, as, clanging violently, it slid up. There stood Sax at the far end of the hall waiting for the intruder, but seeing me he shouted welcome. "Thought you intended to stay for good with Saunders," he told me after the greeting. "What consumed the time? Surely not Saunders." "Never mind, tell it to me later. The Centaurians do things in style. My workshop is a great improvement upon the old one, but, confidentially, Virgilius, give me the attic every time." There the ideas came without wasting hours thinking them up. This luxury inspires yawns. I don't see how these people ever made such rapid headway. And Sax was right. The place resembled a lady's boudoir. All silken cushions, soft carpets, and rainbow tints. "But it's pleasant to rest here when I'm tired," he continued. "I don't object to the frippery. It's all in a lifetime. The rear is serious enough." "And breeches more comfortable, eh, Sax?" I nudged him. "No comparison, my boy," he replied. "I'm done with petticoats. A man can't do anything in them but try to look pretty. No wonder women spend most of their lives primping. It's the petticoats. I've found a tailor who knows his business. Imagine us returning to our own land rigged up in the sort of thing you've got on. Yes, sir, I feel like Saxlander now. Sheldon's done the same thing. Says the climate of the Oxus is too arctic for tights." I decided to don trousers again. "Yes," Sax advised. "Bundle the drapery out. It makes you look like the bearded lady. Now for the propeller. The new machine is a great improvement upon the old one. The defects of the first are remedied in the second. Don't advertise it." He showed me 2 or 3 tiny wheels, several great long screws and rivets, and 2 gigantic pieces of filigree work cast in glittering metal. "Pure gold," he informed me, "cast in crystal molds over a furnace of electricity. It took me several days planning and figuring for the molds, yet by George, the factory delivered them in a few hours." "That's rapid work for you. Molds should always be of crystal." "But the gold," I interrupted. "Is the whole machine to be cast in gold?" "Of course. What of it?" he cried. "It's manufactured by wholesale and on the market like lumber. Look here." He opened the adjoining room and showed me the gold stacked up in blocks ready for use. "Is it absolutely pure?" I asked. "Well," he replied, "it's stood every test I've made upon it. Beyond doubt it's the same article that's so scarce on our side." I held out for steel, but the durability of gold was pointed out, and it was explained the propeller would be in the museum for all time, and gold was the metal. I wouldn't argue with them. They are going to publish books with exquisite illustrations, the date and details of when Podolili first sighted us in the car. Little guidebooks will be issued, explaining all about the strange little steel car and gold propeller presented to the people of Centauri by the renowned Professor Saxliner. Renowned Saxliner sounds first-rate. Ahem! Now look at this. He opened a small box stuffed with silk floss and took out a huge diamond, the size and shape of a pecan, and of dazzling brilliancy. For the propeller, he explained. A perfect gem without a flaw, yet not genuine. Yes, Virgilius, the Centaurians have discovered the secret. This stone is as perfect as any ever taken from the mines. Before returning home, I shall master the intricate combination of gold blocks and diamonds. Nearly all the genuine gems of Centauri have been placed in the museum. The manufactured article is the standard. Man's ingenuity is rated invaluable. Notice the ruby. It contains a fire never seen in the most famous gems of our world. But the stone that defies penetration is the emerald. It guards its secret well and is very rare. Many have attempted to produce the stone and turned out fairly good imitations, but imitation was failure. A perfect emerald must be produced. Half a century ago, a noted scientist delved into the mystery of the emerald. In his efforts to get ahead of competitors, he experimented upon the sacred emerald loaned to him from the museum and actually reduced it to liquid. Old Centauri was sent for and found the scientist frantically trying to analyze the liquid, under the impression it would shortly petrify again, but, to the amazement of both, the strange greenish liquid dwindled and evaporated. That ended the emerald problem with the scientist. He succumbed to an ailment unknown to physicians, and it is believed he inhaled the emerald. Scientists declare the fatal incident analyzed the emerald. The gem is composed of congealed poisonous gases petrified. The Emerald Man became famous because he came nearer solving the green mystery, but his secret died with him. When pressed to divulge, he replied, "My experiment failed. Had I produced the perfect stone, the knowledge would have been free to all. I produced nothing and lost the emerald, as I feared I would." Failures are enervating, should remain obscure. The time in this sphere is too short to ponder over them. Sax told me many curious things about the Centaurians and their wonderful discoveries. We talked till daybreak. He made me promise to visit him daily and be useful, but it was several months before Sax and I met again. I returned to the palace and wandered in the gardens, waiting impatiently for the summons from Alpha Centauri. But I was disappointed. Though I sent many messages, she refused to see me that day and, womanlike, gave no reasons. I idled the glorious morning away in the gardens, then towards noon started for the city in quest of Sax's intelligent tailor. The man seemed to regard my order as an honor, and to my request promised to give it his personal attention, and I would have the garments as early as I desired. He informed me the costume was ancient, but occasionally seen on the stage, and there was a general impression the mountaineers of the Vespa belt still wore it. He took my measure and again promised to accommodate me at the earliest possible moment. I decided the next time Alpha and I met she would behold a gentleman of the period of my world. Strolling leisurely about the city, pondering upon the advisability of visiting Sax again, I suddenly sighted a tall, majestic building, whose portal stood wide with a gigantic statue of the angel genius, smiling a welcome. It was the salon, and remembering the artistic fisherman and Arabella, I entered the gallery with much curiosity. I remained till sundown. The fisherman's work was above and beyond anything in the gallery, not for merit, but originality. He aimed at the mysterious, the startling, and charmed the imagination. An artist who daringly flings upon the world a picture of dull sky and half-obscured moon is a master. Originality is the child of imagination, fame the blossom. There were many clever artists in this strange land, possibly more clever than the extraordinary fisherman, but their work lacked individuality and paled into insignificance before the wild combination of vivid, gaudy shades blended by the greatest artist in the world. But as I viewed the portrait of the beauty Isabella, my admiration for her husband's art dwindled considerably. In the pink and white, simpering portrait the artist betrayed his lack of skill. He failed utterly to produce Abella's delicate archness and made her loveliness a type to compare with his strange ideal of pervertedness. A long panel canvas revealed the dark-browed, intense production posed impossibly statuesque. Deep, gloomy, intelligent eyes, the whole vivid with that which was lacking in the painted prettiness of a Bella. It was a masterstroke placing the two side by side, the one fair, smiling, shallow, the other dark, wintry, magnetic. The failure was obscure. The ideal charmed the eye and attention. I was wondering which type I admired when startled by the sudden flare of lights in the building, the signal of the setting sun, and instantly forgot all types but one and hurried away in happy anticipation. I found Mike greatly perturbed. He told me everyone in the palace had been thrown in great confusion by the tempestuous king of the Vespa Belt. Alpha Centauri honors the traditions of her family, he informed me. She proclaims herself priestess of the sun, and that her celestial duties do not include the unification of the white race. King Benliel departed at sundown. Friendly relations between the two countries are at an end. Centauri and his daughter escorted the wrathy king to his ship. In loud, excited tones, he told them the prince would visit Centaur. "Greetings," Alpha replied. "The people of Centaur will welcome the prince when honored by his presence." Her stateliness, serenity, superiority to the man before her, it was sacrilegious to dream of mating her with the son of such a barbarian. Mike waxed indignant. Centauri watched the departure of their royal visitor till the ship was out of sight, he continued. Then, seeing me near, the priestess of the sun beckoned and bade me tell you she would consult with you in the morning. "I will not see her today at all, then," I cried. Mike shrugged his shoulders. "She is closeted with her father, deep in discussion of important state matters," he told me. "Will the prince visit the city?" I foolishly asked. Without the least hesitancy he replied, "Certainly. Alpha must mate, the last of our people. Prince Benliel may prove worthy." This was consoling. I dismissed him and, weary, disappointed, retired. My slumbers were disturbed with lurid visions of Prince Benliel, and one poppy scene more vivid than others roused me with heartache, and I awoke moaning. The sun streamed into the room, a slanting flame seared straight across my eyes, but through the blur I saw Mike tiptoeing about with disapproving glances fixed upon a heap of clothing fragrant with newness. He strenuously objected to the new clothing, but curious, and unable to assist me, keenly watched my preparations. When I stood complete before him, he turned me around admiringly. "You look very well," he remarked, "but appeared better yesterday." "Nonsense," I retorted. "I look better and feel more like myself now than since entering Centaur." He smiled, bowing deeply. "Alpha Centauri awaits you," he said. "You were to be so informed the moment of awakening." I pushed him aside, shaking my fist at his chuckle, and hurried to meet the sweet woman who was certainly making life a very unhappy problem for me. She received me with a veiled glance and smiled tenderly as I raised her hand to my lips. I chided her for breaking her appointments. "Ah, Virgilius," she replied, "no plans could be perfected till the departure of wrathy King Benliel. I am not divine, and love begets selfishness. I will not sacrifice myself for the people. The Vespa Prince. Finis." We spent the entire day together. Over and over again she told me of her deep infatuation for nothing. Poetically, impassionately, she described the image of her dreams, and no man on earth could ever reach the perfections of the idol this girl had erected to worship. Then I learned of her plans. Alpha Centauri, for the first time in her life, was to leave Centaur and tour the world. A large party of friends had been invited to travel with her, and the government ship Centaur was placed at her disposal. "I have frequently been urged to do this," she told me, advised that I should become familiar with the world I would someday rule. But I demurred. Science was more interesting. I lived a painfully narrow life. What a wonderfully different view you have created. Virgilius, I go in search of the god of my dreams. And the secret was out. Alpha Centauri would search for and, if possible, possess this man of her imagination, and forever bring damnation upon her soul. What woman is happy with the individual she thinks her affinity? "Suppose your search should prove futile," I maliciously suggested. "That is impossible," she replied confidently. "My love exists." I inquired if she would visit the Vespa Belt. "No," she answered quickly. My ideal could not be found among the Vespa people. But we shall sail low and slowly over the belt that you may see it. It will take about 2 days to sail from one point of the crescent to the other, and 5 days of stormy weather over the vast waters that separates the belt from this land. Altogether we shall be absent many months. Centauri does not accompany us. He is much interested in the daring exploits of your great friend, Sheldon, and will pass most of the time in the Oxus. And, Virgilius, we sail tomorrow evening at sundown. End of section number 20.
Section 21 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Yan Guo. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 18. The following day was one of excitement and petty anxieties. I constantly feared the wonderful young woman would, at the last moment, change her mind and electing to remain faithful to her fancy, declare the true elf. But I was far from understanding Alpha Centauri. She directed the preparations with a cool energy that was beyond alteration, and impatient to depart, would have sailed from Central before noon. But superstition prevailed. A lucky voyage must always be started at sundown. I accompanied Alpha to the temple of the sun, where she led the high noon devotions. For the time, she forgot her new emotions in fanatical worship of the sun as the broad rays streamed upon her. All Central knew she would that evening set out to see the world, and the people crowded the streets to cheer their beloved priestess and wish her bon voyage. They cheered her beauty and piety, and, because she had sent King Benlia to his belt disappointed, I alone knew the object of the tour. That evening, at sundown, we boarded the good ship Central. As the great winds fluttered and the vessel slowly rose, a vast crowd shouted good luck to us, and Alpha waved the colors of Centauri in response. Then suddenly we darted ahead into infinite blue plains, and the search for God began. It is impossible to describe the many strange, wonderful sights seen upon those travels. We skimmed swiftly over marvelous, violet-blurred cities, dense forests cut with silvery, winding streams, and over long, snow-capped mountain ranges. Frequently the ship fluttered to earth, and the day was idled away in fishing or gathering wild fruit and flowers. And once we nestled upon a lofty peak that pierced the clouds, and viewed the mountain girdled with sleet, ice, and snow. Yet where we rested, the grass grew rank, and some delicate pink blossoms I gathered and drooped at the breast of Alpha Centauri. It took nearly 2 days to cross a great tract of prairie land, and we flew with dizzy velocity over 5 great oceans. The roaring, mountainous waves swirled frantic for life. It seemed impossible ships ever navigated these fierce waters. Yet they did centuries ago, but disasters had been pouring. As we gazed downward, awed by the stupendous vastness of the earth, the universe, we reverently pondered over the reason of this gigantic creation. Bread of soul, Vigilius, it is a true faith. How obscured the intellect that reasons otherwise. Soul, do not doubt, Vigilius, soul always. Argument is more debilitating than cold in the head. The extraordinary belief of this beautiful Centaurian made her adamant, and I desired the woman, not the belief. We visited all the large cities of this world, great cities of commerce and gigantic industry, and were royally entertained. Our approach, heralded hours in advance, signaled great festivities. These people of advanced views proclaimed wisdom sovereign, but old Centauri is monarch of this land of wise men, and equality is as mythical here as in my world. The great family is supreme. and Alpha, my Alpha, is Princess of Centauri. One continual nationality lacks individuality. Travel in my world is far more interesting. Yet Centauri is beautiful, a wonderful vision of superb development. But see one city, and you will see them all. Alpha Centauri entered these marvelous cities, quivering with expectations, radiant with hope, but departure was invariably hastened by bitter disappointment, and in despair she finally suggested the return to Central. I brusquely advised her to continue traveling, reminding her that once in Central all hope was ended. Then, endeavoring to console, I talked long and earnestly about ideals never realized, and succeeded in rousing anger, which is better. She reproached me for planting this image of torture in my brain, and you class me with the absurdities of 6 centuries ago. Ah, Vigilius, she continued, this phantom of my brain has adoration far exceeding mine. A powerful magnetism forced me upon this tour. All ideas, no matter how fabulous, have had a previous existence. What the brain conceives can be realized. Nothing is impossible. Life is the most fabulous illusion in the universe, a marvelous creation of soul. Vigilius, the magnetism of your idea forced you into a stupendous folly, but you realized. I realize, but it does not bring me peace or happiness, I retorted. You thought and worshipped beyond your sphere, she quickly answered. The current of thought met, crashed, and lost power in vibration. The union of magnets creates disaster. Vigilius, I have a great longing to return to Central. Some force urges me. To travel farther is needless. Ah, how selfish is my passion. I follow your advice. The tour continues. So we sailed onward, and into a corner of her vast knowledge, Alpha Centauri stored the wisdom of deceit. She smiled and appeared gay, happy, when heartsick, disappointed, and bored. She preferred solitude, lost her brilliant coloring, and the grave frank eyes became dull, fatigued. And those traveling with us paid little heed to her erratic ways, believing she was deep in the study of some new scientific discovery, which she was, and had it not been for my pleasant surroundings, it would have been a toss-up between the airship and sex. After all, sex and coal were to be envied. The Propylaea was faithful to sex, the stars true to thunders. Only Sheldon and myself were excavating with doubts as to our landing. Alpha Centauri had gathered about her many charming people. Their entertaining company made life bearable during the tedious ending of the tour. There were several ladies with husbands, 2 young girls with cavaliers, and an interesting mamma who did the talking for them. The girls were very pretty, and the cavaliers devoted. One was a young doctor. We all met him. The other was a descendant of the man who melted the emerald and kept it to himself. Naturally, the young man was rather mournful and stilted. His pride was inherited, and keeping a secret is the most acrobatic feat. And there was a companionable literary man constantly dipping in spelled thought. He did not alarm with allusions to the plot of his forthcoming book, but occasionally boasted of a word of his own, as they all do, and limited his conversation to current topics. His briefness was fascinating, an art. Then we had a mineralogist whose deep scientific problem was sleep. Occasionally he woke up and became as frisky as a boy of 50. His wife was the only woman I ever met who could keep up an incessant chatter and still be interesting. There was a tragedian, playwright, all in one, including a wife. The tragedies this gentleman wrote were excellent farces. He was the greatest humorist of the time. His wit was sharp, bold, and frequently coarse, but he handled his subject with such real delicacy that it took a couple of days to discover that he shouldn't have told the joke, and we shouldn't have laughed. The wife was a beautiful, fair woman of that type that most men are willing some other fellow shall possess. Everybody was very kind to me, and were I not so desperately in love, and therefore desperately unhappy, I would have greatly enjoyed the trip throughout this strange land. The country was rapidly changing in appearance. We sailed over a range of burnt and dwarfed mountains, enclosing completely a vast desert, which narrowed to meet a neck of land that stretched across the ocean, connecting Centauri with the Vesper belt. This connecting land was 50 miles long, 20 wide, and most of the time submerged. You are viewing the ancient battlefield of the Vespers and the Centaurs, the literary man informed me. The last war they had lasted 40 years, close with carnage, and should be eliminated from history. The reading is not elevating, and neither have anything to be proud of. It occurred during the early ages, when civilization ignored the earth which was inhabited by savages and beasts, the beasts being superior and more humane. What the war was over, I've never discovered, nor has anyone else, but it was conducted upon the most hellish plans. During one engagement, the Vespers invaded too deeply the Centauri desert, their idea to surprise the enemy, who were ambushed in the hills. They were permitted to advance well inland. Then suddenly the Centaurs appeared and surrounded them. Not one Vesper returned to the belt, but the scouts informed the Crescent people what had happened. The ancient King Benlil was a demon. The Vespers were enraged, and early the following day the Centaurs were astounded to see another Vesper army marching across the neck. The Centaurians yelled their scorn of the advancing army and rushed to meet it. The battle was fought upon the peninsula, the Vespers gradually retreating, then suddenly, as though panic-stricken, turned tail and fled. The Centaurians, wild, drunk with victory, pursued them closely, and at first did not see the tremendous wall of water rising, cutting off all escape. They realized was the land sank, and the mountainous waves engulfed them. It was a fiendish revenge, the Vespers unrightly named. The literary man gave a shrug of disgust. It had passed from his vision long ago. He was conversing with himself, a habit most literary people affect, and he walked away as unconcernedly as though it had never existed. I wondered if he had really repeated history or simply reviewed a scene from his new romance. We were crossing this historical naked land now, and all round deck, gazing curiously at the dim outlines of the Vesper belt. Alpha Centauri joined us, pale, listless, heavy-eyed, and gave orders for low sailing that we could more distinctly view the possessions of King Benlil. She confidentially told me she would remain in seclusion during the journey over the Vesper belt, and mournfully shook her head when I begged permission to visit her. "The Vesper belt has no charms for me," she murmured. "Ah, Vigilius, do not be downhearted. You have taught me the value of unhappiness. Life is incomplete without it. I am not despondent, but tortured with doubts. He whom I seek waits at the Centaur, but I have suffered disappointment so often, I dread another. Do not think of me, join the others. I shall not see you again till we are crossing the great ocean. She sighed heavily and entered her cabin before I could prevent. The door closed between us, and bitterly I regretted teaching her the knowledge of misery. Love had robbed her of individuality, damning her with a craving for the unattainable worse than death, whose soothing balm of peace, rest, and vacant identity was far more cheerful than eternal yearning. From my heart, I wish I could make her the radiant, soulless, happy creature she was before we met. I would give all I possess if I had never crossed the pole. And suddenly a longing came over me to see once again dear old Middleton. And traitorous thoughts galloped upon me. I had become enamored with a bright and glorious vision. Reproaches, sad eyes, mournfulness were killing my passion. But the vision still exists. I created it. But the Centauri, who enslaved me, was fading. I joined the others, who were leaning over the ship's side and gazing curiously at the village we were sailing over. We could see the people crowding into the narrow streets, and from our ship came a faint report, followed by a cloud of deep violet smoke, which curled upward, twisted, and looped till finally the word Centauri floated in space beside us. At the sight, the crowds below shouted and cheered. We bellowed a response. Toward evening, we passed over a lovely bay. The air was soft, balmy, and we remained upon deck till near midnight. The time passed swiftly between the literary man and the humorist, while the ladies sang in clear, sweet voices. We turned in when a sudden icy squall struck us, and the last view we had of the new country was of dark, gloomy mountains. Next morning, before sunrise, I was on deck, but my travelling companions were earlier and judged me unmercifully. The literary man was persistently witty about oversleeping. He'd been up all night and regaled us about the wondrous sights we'd missed. We had sailed over 3 great cities, brilliant with light, humming with revelry. Some celebration going on. And, he continued, these faithful savages have built wonderful cities of superb architecture. I think we are approaching the royal city of Benlia. See the height of those monstrous domes. The steep of one temple has tried to pierce the sun. The ancient city of Benlia has for ages been the scene of poets. We were sailing over vast green fields and meadowland, where thousands of cattle grazed, and far in the distance, gleaming white, phantom-like through the mist, we saw a great city. As we neared this spectral poem city, the mist cleared before the strong, hot rays of the rising sun, and beneath us stretched a scene of fabulous beauty. Thoroughfares of marble lined with gigantic palms, whose huge branches arched from side to side. High-domed buildings of pure white marble surrounded with vast gardens gorgeous with bloom. Poverty could not exist in this luxurious city. The ship sailed lower that we might view closer this paradise of earth. Nestled in the center of extensive gardens, miniature lakes and streams, false cataracts and high-spraying fountains, was the jewel-like palace of Benlia, a long, flat, shining building. Here, in the heart of civilization, is a barbaric relic of what the Vespa people were, remarked the literary man. They have been working centuries upon that palace, and are still adding to it. It will never be completed. The architecture is valuable only for antiquity and hideousness. he continued, and tasked the ingenuity of modern architects to follow the original plan. The building is entirely mosaic. Taken as a whole, it is of remarkable beauty, I blurted out. There's not another building to compare with it in the wide world. Everybody became greatly interested in the strange palace with its numerous domes, steeples, and beautiful lacy archways, an abode for gnomes and fairies, the crown jewel of the Vesper belt, its diadem of artistic glory. Centauri, with all her wonders, could not boast of any work to compare with this marvelous palace. Slowly, reluctantly, we sailed from the superb marble city, with its gleaming white edifices, mosaic palaces, and vast boulevards haunting the memory, so that in dreams the beautiful scene is revisited again and again. This crescent-shaped country was cultivated from point to point, and boasted a population of over 40 millions. The Vespers worshipped the sun, but enjoyed the dusk. In Centauri, twilight is unknown, and the state of progression between the two countries was not worth worrying over. They were tanto per tanto. The morning of the third day, we reached the extreme north point of the belt, and sighted the great ocean. The air was misty, ice-cold, and the piercing salt breeze suddenly turned to a terrific gale, and tore and whistled around the ship, forcing her head at dizzy speed. "We'll be out of it in a second," the little gent assured us. I felt we were venturing rather near the danger point. There 4 wind currents meet. Anything caught in it is lost. The gale we are flying before is merely one of the 4. Imagine the extreme north point of the crescent. It is said that at one time this land extended half across the ocean. But these 4 gales, blowing constantly for ages, have gradually blown the belt to its present small dimensions. Possibly in a few centuries more, the belt will vanish, and the crescent country become one of the great legends of Centauri. The ladies laughed incredulously, but the men pretended to take the speaker seriously. "You speak with prophetic wisdom," said the tragedian. "The interpreter of tragedies can be blunt, and his words always taken in jest. The Vesper belt will never be swallowed by the 4 winds, but in less than 10 years she will be submerged by Centauri. For perfect civilization, progression, harmony, there must be unity. I do not jest, but a tragedian is always a jester." He was vigorously applauded and encouraged to continue, but, bowing, modestly refrained commenting further upon the subject, and suggested we go above, as the wind had calmed. We trooped up on deck, and were greeted by a hot, blazing sun, a deep blue sky, and a fierce ocean with mountainous waves boiling white beneath us. Far in the distance were the snow mountains and the white cliffs of the Vesper belt, which in the clear sunlight showed up a perfect crescent. "We have entered another zone," the writing gent informed us. "We have emerged from the wind regions, and, He ended abruptly. No one was listening to him. All looked in one direction. And, as I looked, the blood rushed to my head. Alpha Centauri stepped from her cabin, radiantly beautiful, garbed in white. In an instant, I was beside her. With passionate ardor, I pressed her hand to my lips. Her face flushed delicately. Pallor, dejection had vanished. Her eyes gleamed and burned. She was the personification of joy. "In a few days we'll be in Central. Think what that means to me," Vigilius, she murmured. You are positive then? I so have read it there, she replied. He waits me, central in all disappointments. I will talk with you later. This day of worship. I am the priestess of the sun. Rising to her full height majestically, she walked down the deck with upstretched arms and waving toward the sun. High, clear, rang out her clarion voice in the call to worship, and the people flocked from all parts of the ship, circled around her, and kneeled. With a swaying form, she chanted in low, weird tones. The glorious eyes did not blink before the dazzling rays that enveloped her. She twisted, undulated, as though to have the streaming fairy light bathe every portion of her body. Then suddenly, as in ecstasy, out came the cry of devotion. High, clear, sweet. At that moment, the sun's rays slanted, and in the golden shadow the glorious priestess stood silent, rapt. Then her arms fell to her sides, and the devotions ended. All rose, and went about their various duties. Alpha turned to me with a smile as placid as a child's. Always the priestess of the sun, she murmured. I love, soul, how I love. This new worship absorbs my whole life, but always the priestess of the sun, Vigilius. I led her to the other side of the ship, away from the others. Vigilius, she murmured, do not think me childish because I sought seclusion while sailing over the belt. I did not think of the Vespers, but I could conceal my happiness no longer. Solitude has no prying, curious eyes. I was alone, gloomy, morose, despairingly worshipping a fancy. And believe as you wish, Vigilius, I know not if I dreamed or was awake, but for the instant the veil of obscurity lifted, and I saw the future. Things like great paintings were revealed, then slowly slid from view. Only two was I permitted to gaze upon with memory. I saw the palace at the center sparkle in the vivid light of noon. Wandering disconsolately through the halls was a form swathed in twilight. I tried to pierce through the flickering dusk and listen to my name repeatedly called, frequently imploringly, always with passion. Like a magnet, I was drawn within the mystic gloom. I tried to touch, to speak with the shadow. Then, like a flash, the scene shifted, and I floated over the Oxter mountains. Standing upon the cliffs, gazing with grave anxiety into the waters of the Ortega, was your friend, the great Sheldon. Suddenly, he raised his face, white, wild with terror, and shouting. He leaped with great bounds from cliff to cliff. His cries brought the men from the caves, and I saw my father among them, calm, magnificent, giving directions, commanding order. I heard an awful rumbling noise. The mountains swayed as trees in the wind. The sky became suffused, lurid, the air suffocated. There was a terrific explosion. A huge fan of fire rose, meeting the heavens, and monstrous columns of yellow, red, black smoke swallowed all nature. I shrieked in horror, and obscurity clouded the frightful scene. Once more, the future was blank, dark, elusive. Vigilius, I did not sleep or dream. Centauri, Sheldon, and all with them are in peril. I shall save them. Speed has been doubled. The ship travels swifter than the wind, and we will reach the mountains toward the evening of the day after tomorrow. It is the fastest time ever made over the great ocean, and the Augustus is the first land sighted, then central. Come, Vigilius, this will never do. We must join the others. Atoesti will teach you the game he's eternally playing with Giaisti. Atoesti was the literary giant, and he of Giaisti the dramatist. I argued against both gentlemen and the game, and feeling pleaded to remain with her the afternoon. She laughingly refused to listen to me and made sport of my earnestness. We joined the others. Atoesti called me to the table where he was playing with Giaisti. I watched the game some time, but was soon convinced that in 100 years I couldn't master it. It was tedious, complicated, and played with oblong ivory chips the size of match, ornamented with fine threads of color. The game seemed a mixture of chess, checkers, and hopscotch, played upon a board similar to the chart of the heavens. The splintery chips were twirled in the air and fell upon the chart in squares, triangles, circles. Where the trick's points came in, I have still to discover. The gentleman invited me to take a flip in the game, but I hastily retreated amid shouts of derision. We were warned from the deck as the ship suddenly lowered and zigzagged at a terrific speed. The great winds fluttered heavily, and frequently the ship crested the turbulent waves like a monster seagull. We had reached the danger zone. Safety lay in hugging the water to avoid the fierce wind currents crashing above. But we soon outdistanced the danger, and gradually floated upward high and higher. By noon we crossed in our accustomed sphere, but speeded on with the hurricane following swiftly. From the little signal house, Alpha and I watched the storm gathering and strengthening. "We speed ahead," she murmured. "But if cold, devotion so sore, all is over." I pressed her close to me. At that moment, death with her seemed a rapture. Then she was mine forever. But I shall never forget that frightful night. The din, uproar of thunderous cannonading, as great black, red, lightning-pierced clouds met the ocean, was terrifying. The ship creaked and groaned threateningly in her wild flight before the hurricane. With the ill-concealed alarm, I sat up all night, but the others retired as usual. The Centaurian equipoise will remain forever an enigma. Dawn ended up peril. We still traveled before a gale, but had outsailed the tempest. Above was a clear blue sky, and the soft radiance of the rising sun enveloped the ship. Toward noon, we reached the dead-calm ocean tropics. The heat flamed upon oily, slothful waters, but we sailed with the swiftness of bird. And far in the distance, a heliotrope bridge met her vision. "The Oxstars!" cried Alpha, delighted. "We shall reach them in the early evening." And all day she watched till the violet line became a positive purple, and gradually deepening into peak and curve with soft velvety slopes. Yet as we neared the mountains, I noticed, with astonishment, that they reached the water's edge without a beach. Perpendicular cliffs with a smooth, shining surface, barren, upright, a gigantic wall that the huge ocean waves dash against in high-bounding sprays. It was rosy twilight when we sailed over these uncanny mountains, so sharply divided by cold and barren cliffs on one side and deep forests and rich valleys on the other. Anxiously, Alpha gazed downward and called my attention to the ominous rumbling, which I suppose was the roar of the ocean. "I fear we are too late," she murmured. "It seems we will never reach the place where the great shield and Centauri are imperiling their lives, tampering with the volcanic Ortega." In vain I tried to calm her. Words made her desperate, and as the detonations increased, She clasped her hands tightly in agony. The air grew dense, sultry, vibrating with electricity. All scented danger, calamity, and clustered together in alarmed little groups, murmuring, "The Ortega! The Ortega!" The ship slackened speed as we sighted the Ortega, and her great wings fluttered as though about to lower. Upon us all was agitation. The ocean boiled furiously, and high tide crashing over the steep cliff wall and flooding the land. People, panic-stricken, scurried in all directions. Then Centauri appeared. We knew him by his long, white beard. The little crowd gathered about him, but suddenly, all with one accord, rushed to the side of the mountain, where, in a hollow, the ship rested. We could see them scrambling over the side of the vessel, working, tugging with desperation to loosen her. We lowered a little to give assistance, but the ship bounded free, the great bad wings vigorously unfurled. Then shouts of distress coming from land startled us, and we saw a man running, mad with terror. He reached the ship, and grasping the side, and just as she lurched upward, jerking his body out with a shock, then banging it back with terrific force. I turned sick, and covering my eyes. The man was Sheldon. My blood curdled as I thought of his awful death, expecting, of course, that he'd fallen to earth and was dashed to pieces. But Alpha whispered that he was safe, that he'd come to the vessel as he had to his theory, and the Centauri had dragged him from his awful position. I could see him lying on the deck. The two vessels sailed close and established communication. Alpha talked with her father, and I learned the great Ortega would soon be in eruption after a crowd of 6 centuries. We lingered to view the phenomenon. "I am glad the matter is settled for all time," murmured Alpha. "Certainly the great Sheldon's visit to Centauri has been of some benefit. His love for theories have obtained positive results and settled forever a grave doubt to the satisfaction of everyone." She laughed as I suggested that Sheldon, to a certain extent, had been deceived. "He deceived himself," she replied. "No one disputed his positive assertions, and consequently he believed all agreed with him. But everyone went up to the Oxstars and bent upon private investigations. Your friend was intent upon discovering the source of that body of water, and delegates from 4 geographical geological societies accompanied him solely to determine whether the volcano was extinct or not. All have been successful. Isn't it strange, Vigilius," she continued, "that water was so fresh, wholesome, beneficial to the system, yet the fish could not live in it. We tried, and—" A warning shout came from a Centaur's ship. Ours shot upward like a rocket, and slanted across the sky, swift as an arrow. A terrific explosion took place, and thunder rolled from the heavens, while earth responded with tremendous detonations. The incessant roaring, sizzling noise was frightful. The majestic fury of the Ortega had awakened from its long trance. Sulphurous flames played about the volcano, giving it a terrible, weird appearance. Steam rose in monstrous clouds, and the waves of the liquid fire boiled and dashed against the cliffs, overflowing the huge cauldron in broad streams of molten mass, deluging the earth with devastation. Ashes, rock, and lava shot skyward in monster geysers of incandescent matter that gave us prismatic lights, and in stinging, serpent-like coils rise to the sea. Voluminous waves hedging the Oxstars, and their steady blaze cast a deep crimson purple glare over the heavens that must have reached to Central. We were 10 miles away. Our ship had a heavy coating of cinders, and the sickening odor of sulphur suffocated. A scorching smoke devoured the air and hung like a pall over all nature, obscuring everything except the splendid, diabolical phenomenon. belching flame and lightning forking from the gigantic crystal columns that shot upward hundreds of feet. It was a fearsome, stupendous spectacle, and time seemed infinite, and so absorbed had I been watching the magnificent Ortega that from light touch I started as from a dream, mumbling gruffly, "Awake, Vigilius! You are fascinated by the splendid Ortega." A sudden dazzling flash illuminated the ship, and I saw her. She laughed teasingly as I caught her hand and pressed it against my face. "We are going to Central," she told me. "All lights have been extinguished. The thousands are on their way to view the volcano. Should it become known that I have returned, the loyal people will forego that marvelous sight and accompany us back to Central. The lava streams are rushing down the other side of the mountain into the sea. The flow will continue many days, and there will be intermittent eruptions for months, and then the Ortega will be dormant, probably forever." "Much damage done?" "Some," she answered. "To the Potolilis. The Oxstars is the property of the Potolilis. They know the Ortega and avoid it. There's much timber lost, but the Potolilis are a tribe of vast wealth. Centauri has ordered his ship brilliant illuminated, so all may know he has not perished." Our ship had ceased its aimless floating, and sighted straight for Central. Far in the distance, speeding toward the Oxstars, were thousands of red globe lights traveling thick together, resembling the Milky Way suddenly lowered to our sphere. We darted in a westerly direction, avoiding the flying multitude, which gradually sailed past like a great stream of meteors, and traveled in groups or long straggling lines, and all heavily laden with sightseers. One huge vessel, sailing apart from the others, edged us closely. She was gaily illuminated and decorated with the colors of Centauri. We did not clear her in time, and she spied our dark hawk and saluted. We flashed farther into the darkness, but the sound of gay music, wild singing, shouts, and the shrill laughter of the men and women aboard followed us. "A private vessel, party of pleasure-loving young people out for a lark," I suggested. Arthur watched the vessel till it appeared but a pale stream of light against the sky. "Possibly a wedding party," she replied. "But the ship floated the colors, which signal some great personage aboard, and banners are hoisted only upon national fete days. This ship carried the flag of Centauri. Odd this particular ship should stray aside just as we passed to nearly collide with us." She gazed perplexedly into the darkness, and silently, thoughtfully studied the starry horizon. Then, with a murmured "good night" and a gentle handclasp, she left me. Suddenly, our ship blazed with lights, and the Centauri banners were hoisted. We cut sharply across the heavens, separating entirely from the speeding sightseers, our lights undistinguishable. No one dreamed Alpha Centauri was returning to Central. "It is 3 hours on the new day. Why do you not retire?" A deep voice rumbled close to my ear. With a start, I turned and confronted the literary man. "Why don't you seek rest yourself?" I snapped. "I have rested too long. I'm fine in arrears with my work, but I've put everything aside to complete an ode upon the joyful emotions Alpha Centauri is supposed to entertain when beholding Central once again." His eyes twinkled, and he chuckled without smiling. "You are humorous," I told him. "Do you doubt the joyful emotions?" "I never answer questions," he replied. "They always lead to argument, and time is still limited for that. An argument should last at least a month, and both sides talking all the time. How very young, inexperienced you must be, Vigilius. You still have to discover that women have no emotions. The Centaurians are all humorists, and tragedy is an obliterated evil. And, Vigilius, we reach Central at sunrise. I must go and finish my ode to joy. We will meet again. He hurried away, chuckling, glancing over his shoulder to smile good-humoredly at me. Alone, a sudden depression came upon me. I was living in a nerve-wracking atmosphere of doubt and anxiety. Dejectedly, I entered my cabin to wait in gloomy misery for day. But deadly wearied, unknowingly, I sank into deep slumber, which lasted till heavy movements about the ship roused me. I hurried on deck. The morning was flush with the rising sun. We sailed over a deep blue bay, and just ahead glistened the crystal city of Central. Everybody was on deck to view the magnificent scene, but exchanged amused glances and smiled openly at my tardiness, while Alpha, radiant, buoyed with hope, greeted me with laughter and jest. Repose had not banished despondency. I chilled with dread and black forebodings. In all the travels, when constantly fearing the possible materializing of the adored, I never experienced the positive hopelessness that now warned me of sure and bitter disappointment. Alpha Centauri would treasure the ideal forever. I was miserable, cruelly fated to worship a phantom which was fading from my life. I knew it. In agony of wretchedness, I caught her hand, holding it tight, and she, God, laughed in her mirthful mood, and taunting my gloomy countenance. The others joined in her sport, and gaily encouraging me and equipped my depression. Yet smile I could not. The dramatist declared I would make tragedy popular again, and the literary genius told me he would never regret our meeting, as I had colored the closing chapter of his forthcoming romance, which finale would crown him with immortality. You shall jest no longer at my Vigilius, cried Alpha, leading me away, though laughing merrily. It matters not what passed between us. She spoke seriously, and of the future. I am glad to return, she murmured. Do not begrudge me the scant joy of expectancy. It is only on the surface. In my heart I feel. I cannot envelop you with a sweet foolishness lavish upon the impossible. But you told me to love. I belong to you. And, Vigilius, we may both be happy yet. God, I gasped, scarcely believing what I heard. My senses tingled. I seemed to choke. She gazed at me with wide-open, tender eyes, and passionately I pressed her hand to my lips. She flushed at my ardor and turned aside. In mad adoration, I caught her in my arms and crushed her to me. I cared not if the whole world spied upon us. I kissed my glorious Alpha upon the lips, eyes, and sweetly flushed cheeks. Snickering, smothered guffaws aroused my drugged senses. Protesting vigorously, yet good-naturedly against my ardent caresses, Alpha freed herself, calling me a wild boy, but lovable. And look, she cried, running to the ship's side. Look, Vigilius, we have reached Central. End of section 21.
Section 22 of the Centaurians, This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marisza Sheldon. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 19. The ship gradually lowered as we floated over the city. The news flashed over Centaur that the priestess of the sun had returned, and excited crowds blackened the street, shouting a welcome. Alpha leaned far over the ship's side, waving the flag of Centaurian response. Centaur was in gay attire. Gaudy flags and pennants floated from the domes of all buildings. Gorgeous silken banners coiled around the arms of Centauri and gently fluttered against huge arches and towers of rare blossoms, whose rich fragrance absorbed the air. Something wonderful was certainly going on. Alpha turned to us, bewildered. "What is it?" she queried. "Our return was unheralded. It is not a fete day. How beautiful Centaur looks!" She shrugged her shoulders and again smiled down upon the welcoming people. The ship finally reached the palace park, then fluttered and circled downward and gently settled in its steel shed. The crowd surged against the walls with deafening shouts of greeting. Alpha waved her arms, and her clarion voice rose high in the worshipful cry of soul. Like an avalanche, the response fell upon her, betraying the joy these people felt at seeing her again. How they loved this beautiful woman! And now, as I think of it, I believe it was she, glorious Alpha, whom they worshipped, not the sun. With sweet dignity she received the officials who hurried to meet her. Bisogno, the great statesman who acted as chief executive during Centauri's absence, saluted deeply and welcomed her in eloquent phrases. She was told that official notice had been received that her travels were about terminating, but that her sudden return was a joyous surprise to the people of Centaur. "If my return is so unexpected, what fete day is Centaur celebrating?" she inquired. "Centaur wears gala attire in honor of our distinguished guest, who has delighted the populace with his presence nearly a fortnight," Bisogno informed her. "Benliel of the Vespa Belt waits the superb Alpha Centauri." I was standing beside her, but instinctively drew away, repelled by her sudden icy demeanor. Once more I beheld the strange, enigmatical goddess who had welcomed me upon my arrival to the city, Alpha Centauri, priestess of the sun always. Erect to her full height, with cold, calm, haughty eyes, she regarded the gentleman before her. She raised her arm and placed it across her breast, and with stiff formality bowed. "Greetings to the Vespa Prince," she said. "His return to his people shall not be delayed. I will receive Prince Benliel at once." Bisogno was not at all dismayed by her manner. She had always been gracious to him, but this was Alpha of the Centauries, priestess of her deity, a perfect woman, passionless, a saint. The glowing, palpitating creature I created was not for public adoration. She was mine always. Bisogno explained that the prince was absent, gone to view the magnificent Ottega, but will speed back to Centaur when informed that the priestess of the sun has returned. "A ship passed us in the night," she told him, "gay with the nation's color, and freighted to the brim with merriment. Bisogno, the morning is still early. Before noon you will hear my order. Prince Benliel must not be disturbed in his pleasures." Bisogno bowed low. None dared approach her, and silently she disappeared within the palace, whose portals were draped with the gaudy silken banners of the Vespas. I did not see her again till the evening. Bisogno and his suite remained in respectful attitudes till she passed from view, then abruptly hurried away, and I was left with the little troop of traveling companions who were palpably impatient to depart. A low whistle near me, and I turned and faced the literary man, who grasped my hand, telling me he could never repay the debt of inspiration I had roused within him. "Your companionship lures success," he barked. I smiled acknowledgment, but the tragedian relieved me from replying. He clung to my other hand and begged me to remain forever among them. Never in my life, he assured me, have I experienced the exquisite diversion enjoyed in your company. Your skill as a tragedian is genius, your interpretations famous. Ah, Virgilius, your amazing capabilities will force the public to comprehend the great tragedies that no Centaurian can act. The powerful masterpieces of morbid imagination shall cease to be farces. I listened attentively, not certain if they were making sport or meant it, but both seemed ridiculous, and I laughed. The laugh was taken up heartily, and both gentlemen simultaneously dropped my hand, each declaring gravely I was deep as the fire geyser in the ice summit. Then one, throwing out his chest, cried, "Attention, friends! Will sensations ever cease? Or is it the commencement of the end, when the world will explode into millions of particles, as Thoralda the Great predicts? Listen! First Virgilius and his friends drop among us from no one knows where, to overpower us with their marvelous experiences. Then the Otega becomes active after 6 centuries of repose. And now comes this splendid savage, the Prince of Vespas, ruler of the land of hornets, whose swift progression dares them to defy even Sol. We are far in the rear of these people. They would elevate us by sending the most audacious hornet of them all. For what? To mate with the rarest and most perfect of Centaurians, Alpha, priestess of the sun, who can never mate. Jingle the cap and bells, friends. Hail to the splendid, glorious Prince Benlial." They applauded him noisily, and I tried to crush the sudden, sick, miserable feeling that came over me. They finally left me. Even the crowd outside had dispersed, and I was left alone deep in gloom and hopelessness, assailed with a cowardly faintness of heart that made me at last realize why I had been a failure all my life. I knew well the import of the prince's visit, but it seemed preposterous. The savage was to end my dream. He was only a man, far from ideal. Bah! Absurd! I flung out my arms as though brushing my trouble from me. "Alpha Centauri! My own creation! Mine forever!" I cried. Discreet footsteps, an apologetic cough sounded near me, and I turned to face Mike, the ever-smiling Mike. He handed me a note, and I read that Alpha Centauri had many important matters to attend to, and could not see me till evening. She wished me to rest so my mind would be clear, refreshed, and able to give undivided attention to the many affairs she would consult with me. Mike bowed deeply and followed as I hurried to my apartments. He regaled me with the palace gossip. I learned that Saunders had suddenly ended his connection with the observatory and, with a party of scientists, had traveled throughout Centauri, returning only last evening when he and the great inventor departed immediately for the Oxtas, both wildly anxious about their friend Sheldon, who they feared had perished. Saxliner had completed his marvelous machine, and he, Mike, presumed all 3 would again become guests at the palace. Then he told me of Prince Benlial, a magnificent specimen of manhood, who had enthralled the hearts of the people and was enthusiastically cheered whenever he appeared upon the streets. "He is searching for his affinity, ahem," said Mike, "and has already traveled over half the world. He boldly declares he has come to court our beauteous Alpha, and vows the priestess of the sun shall be his bride. His bravery and frankness charmed all, even conquering Centauri, who placed the palace at the disposal of the handsome boy. But all pity him. It is really sad to think of the meeting between him and the wondrous Alpha, who, though the most perfect of women, can be infernally cruel. The prince will depart in anger, and the unification of the white race will be delayed several centuries, though much desired both by the people and Centauri. Else the prince's reception would have been different, and his stay among us brief. Like the savages, he adores all women, and would throw the whole world in an uproar to obtain the one he desires. What an incomprehensible weakness! However, he is enjoying himself immensely among the gay youngsters of the city, and, luck to him, luck to the pretty boy. Mike irritated me, and I dismissed him. Then, wondering what I should do till evening, began scribbling notes to Alpha, begging to be received. I was desperate, positive I must see her at once. She replied verbally, Much important business to transact. Please excuse, etc. I gave it up. Why trouble her? She did not care and could not understand. Selfish, cold-hearted. God, how cruel this beautiful woman could be. She was one of those imperfect creatures who never love, their whole nature dominated by self, fitfully passionate, as unreliable as life. Yet she was my own creation, mine. I found myself pitying the Vespa Prince. After all, he was only a man like myself, and I suffered. Yes, I suffered. I sauntered aimlessly through the gardens, then wandered around the city, loitering in the streets and parks, watching children at play, and finally sought rest in the salon, burdened with art treasures. I looked again upon the tranquil beauty of Abella, wife of the gifted fisherman. The face was so calm, placid, vacant. One wondered why humanity worried over trivial nothings. Life is brief, and we cram so much unhappiness into it. Why strive for what we can never accomplish? Why strive at all? Be content, accept destiny. No effort can alter it. Crawl and crawl as does the worm. We are but another species. Life is a mysterious, enchanting dream. The awakening, dissolution. There are very few souls among the millions inhabiting this sphere that have mastered the knowledge of living. The majority merely exist. Every man, woman, and child should be drilled through the intricacies of nature. Make them thorough in this powerful art, the art of living. Then call their attention to the tedious verbs. I smiled up into the beautiful, soulless eyes of Abella. Tranquil, sublime beauty, you have calmed tumultuous thoughts. Adieu, sweet Abella. How your husband has marred your fairness. I blew a kiss to the delicate painting as I hurried away. The long, slanting rays of the afternoon sun lengthened into dusk, and as I reached the palace, the city flamed with lights. The stately quiet of the Centauri dwelling had vanished. All was activity, bustle. The doors of the throne room and vast salons were flung wide. Decorators were at work. At the far end of the lofty vestibule, dimly seen amid crystal columns, was the banquet hall, with long, massive tables laden with shimmering satin and glistening plate of gold and silver. Some great event was to take place, and I hurried to my rooms to find Sachs, Sheldon, and Saunders eagerly awaiting me. We were powerfully glad to see each other. Though all were anxious to relate their experiences and adventures since last meeting, Sheldon was given the floor, owing to his late narrow escape through too much Otega. In excitable tones, he described the progression of his work before the eruption ruined all. "Boys," he cried, "I was right about the whole matter of the scientific societies of the world be hang. I discovered the source of that great body of fresh water, the Arctic Ocean. It does not supply the earth as I originally contended, but it creates, feeds all streams, rivers, lakes, for thousands of miles in that vicinity. The Centaurians have wonderful mining apparatuses. We mined those mountains for miles, tracing the flow of the water through the vast arteries of the earth. Springs were numerous, the water bubbling in tiny geysers, clear and sparkling. I proved my assertions, and convinced the greatest man of this part of the world, Centauri himself. During his stay in the mountains, I learned the secret of his greatness, simple, unassuming, yet his wisdom is of such superiority and profundity he cannot impart it to others. Sublime in his generosity and knowledge, he listens to all. I never believed I could feel such reverence for any human being. He impresses everyone the same way, hence his greatness. As for the delegates of the two societies who accompanied me up the mountains, I was perfectly aware what they stationed themselves there for, to settle their dispute, whether the volcano was extinct or not, and I'm damned glad they found out. Talk about the calmness and haughtiness of these people. Those men squabbled from morning till night and seriously hindered my work. They were constantly wiring statements to their different headquarters, and once the entire crew of both societies swooped down upon us, consuming several days in mass meetings and idleness. Centauri told me the Otega was dormant, having found an outlet in some other portion of the globe, but the solid mass collected here and was a depot for further eruptions. He agrees with me that this body of water is not the aftermath of the famous eruption of 6 centuries ago. The crater became the bed, for one of the greatest freaks of nature, a gigantic artery burst, forming the oceanlet, which is simply a continuation of the Arctic. And friends, ended Sheldon with a twinkle. All who accompanied me came away with energy and fully satisfied. He waved his hand toward Saunders, who grudgingly complimented him upon his successful discovery, but suggested that neither he nor Sheldon could become bombastic over their success. Both were on par. But, smiling around, I toured Centauri and journeyed halfway to the moon. Through miscalculation, my work at the observatory was only partially successful. I manufactured a set of lenses 3 degrees more powerful than those in use. My intention was to extend the power 5 degrees. The people over here are thorough in everything they undertake, but slow. For 50 years, the astronomers have been planning a trip to the moon, and arrangements were just completed when I arrived and was complimented with an invitation to join the expedition. The Centaurians are very progressive. They attempt to attain the impossible. We started upon our wonderful trip in an especially constructed flying machine, loaded with instructions what we were to do when we got there, and the signals we were to send to the gaping boys down here. We traveled very rapidly, attaining a height never reached by balloon. We suffered, of course. Hemorrhage attacked us in its most malignant forms, but we paid no heed to this weakness, believing in the scientific assurances that, as we became accustomed to the rarefied, ever-changing altitude, such annoyances would cease. And they did. In the meantime, the higher we pierced this atmosphere, the farther away the moon seemed, and our own globe had become a huge glowing ball, throwing out a wonderful radius of rosy light, tinting space a deep pink to seemingly unfathomable spheres. We had sailed far and above this roseate radiance when panic seized us. All had one unuttered thought, an intense desire to return to Earth, but enough of the world remained in us to secrete cowardice. I, for one, lost courage entirely with the eccentric movements of the ship, which suddenly zigzagged oddly, giving great bounds upward, then fell back a space and shot slantways across the sky. But for all of her queer antics, she continually gained in height, and height apparently was all we concerned ourselves about. However, gradually everything ceased to interest us. A peculiar indifference embraced all, a deadly lassitude. We lolled around seeking rest, peace, to dream forever in blessed forgetfulness of existence, to sail away in the cool blue depths of eternity. How long I remained in that strange tranquility I shall never know, but suddenly shrieked with the terrible pain in my heart. 1,000 tons seemed to be pressing on my brain, and vivid streaks of lightning pierced my sight. I was blinded, but danger roused me, and I staggered, groping my way to the engine room. A heavy, inert form barred the passage, but I stumbled over it to the gigantic clock, whose hands guided the ship. An ominous roaring sound warned me of grave disaster. If we continued to travel upward, the ship would explode. Ignorant how to regulate the ship's speed, I moved the upper hand of the clock downward, and down we shot like a rock. Then I stared at the great hands, hesitating what to do next, when someone pushed me aside. A man, haggard, bleeding profusely from the mouth, deftly moved the hands of the clock, and the ship slackened its crushing downward course. "Blessings upon your vitality," he whispered. "Otherwise we would all be dead. We realize the nectar of existence when we feel it oozing from us. Life, soul, give me life. Science, bah, nonsense." We revived as we approached our natural sphere, but it was an experience I shall never forget, and it cost the lives of 2 men, a noted professor and the engineer, who died like a hero. Much good it did him. He gave his life for science, believing himself the only one who succumbed. We took the professor and engineer to their homes, then toward Centauri, which consisted in dropping each member of the expedition to their city. When we dwindled to 3, Centaur was reached, and, here I am. Our congratulations seemed to make Saunders uneasy. "You forget," he interrupted. "Our trip to the moon was a failure. A second excursion will not be attempted for several centuries. Eventually, they will succeed. Our journey to the moon has been suppressed. When we return to our own hemisphere, I shall be sadly regretted by the scientists here for all their marvelous advancement. I imparted much information and predicted this, their latest failure. I haven't done bad, not bad at all. but not for 1,000 lives would I journey to the moon again." "Why didn't you visit the Vespa Belt instead?" Saunders sniffed. "There was no choice offered," he replied, "but certainly I would have preferred the moon. The Vespa folks are way back savages, I understand, and a broad expanse of wigwam does not inspire me." He eyed me sharply when I told him he was wrong, all wrong, that the belt was the most wonderful portion of this part of the globe. Then I described the art and originality of the people and the peculiarly beautiful mosaic palace of King Benliel. Saunders sniffed. He wasn't interested in the Vespas, and turned quickly to Sachs, who remarked that he was mighty glad we were all together again anyhow, because for some time, having no occupation, he'd been ripe for mischief. "The Propellier was completed weeks ago, and I've examined the machine they're going to present to us. It's a wonderful structure of crystal and steel, and covers 150 miles an hour. The coaches attached are fitted up luxuriously. Our return trip will not be so hazardous, and decidedly more comfortable, and we all have the supreme satisfaction of having discovered what we searched for. We found the pole, and can prove of the wonderful cities beyond. I have mastered the marvelous secrets of gold and diamonds, and now have the power to do my share in the vast endeavor to stamp out the evil passion that causes so much unhappiness, greed. Sheldon discovered his great body of fresh water, and has some excellent photographs stored away that will make him famous. His homecoming will be glorious. He'll be given an ovation because he risked his life for science. He can prove the positive existence of the freak ocean. He will experience the rare and pleasurable sensation of ridiculing those who formerly ridiculed him. And that's going some." Sheldon spruced up. Sachs's approval was exhilarating. "And Saunders succeeded also," continued Sachs. "He discovered the famous pink star that all astronomers know of but fail to locate. He has some remarkable photographs, and has written up a treatise on why the star is not visible from our point of view, and constructed a new map of the heavens. He'll return to his continent magnificently equipped with all the modern astronomical contrivances that Centaurians can supply him with, and can lecture at length of how he went to the Centaurians better concerning powerful lens, whatever they are. During his homeward journey, he will occupy the time writing a book of his trip to the moon. Really, I think we've all done first rate. Couldn't have done better. We accomplished what we set out to do. But there's Virgilius." He looked over at me and shook his head reprovingly. "He's simply our millionaire Salucci, the same as formerly. He's gained knowledge, of course, but he won't air it to the world. Yet, come to think of it, he's been about as successful as any of us. He came in search of a woman, and found her." He smiled encouragingly at me and opined that mine was a mission more difficult than any. "His was a fancy, mythical, intangible," said Sachs. "A tantalizing dream, a hallucination, and the realization more marvelous than the imagination. Virgilius should be happy. He is the first man in creation that ever realized the ideal and made it his own. He has succeeded where all men fail." I sprang joyously to my feet. His words invigorated faint hope, but he hurried to me and anxiously grasped my shoulder. "You return with us, Virgilius," he said. "We cannot, nay, we dare not leave you with these strange people." "You make me mad with joy," I cried. "I love, ah, how I love, but hopelessly, hopelessly." All smiled. "Poor actor," laughed Sachs. "Pretense too thin. Sounds sweet, and you want more. Hopeless? Fiddlesticks, you've won. Men always know when they're ahead. You're picked for the mate of the superb Alpha. Sheldon and Saunders have bet 10-1 on it. She's been declared false to her vows, and is no longer priestess of the sun. Gossips whisper of your strange influence upon the fair Centaurian. Your absence creates restlessness, distraction, and she seeks every opportunity to study you intently, absorbingly. Bah! Just an ordinary case. You discover a handsome woman, innocent, with blank mind, which you proceed to fill with foolish fantasies, and, true to her sex, wearying of myths and shadows, she welcomes stalwart, vigorous flesh and blood. It is nonsense that will provide a pleasant remembrance. It must not detain you among these people. Why, Virgilius, we cannot leave you. heavens, boy! Think! We dare not return without you. She will forget. They all do. By George! The women over here are more unreliable than those of our world, and—" I shouted with happiness. 1,000 words could not separate me from Centauri if what you tell me is true, I cried. I will remain, give up everything. But it is too much happiness. You exaggerate. Tonight I will know. Have you all forgotten the Vespa Prince? A pang quivered through me. My spirits ebbed as I mentioned the name, but my friend's laughter renewed courage and vanity. With a swoop, doubts vanished. Thank heaven! I had won! Alpha Centauri was mine forever. I laughed joyously. Sheldon's sharp eyes twinkled as he twitted me of my love. "The Vespa Prince," he jeeringly remarked. "You overdo your little act. When one is beloved, there are no rivals. You know it. The superb Alpha thinks, dreams of just one man, Virgilius. The prince is the final act of comedy, unnecessary, witless. He cares not a rap for the peerless Alpha. He was sent here to work as much mischief as possible, then come home again. The king is a vindictive old cuss, thinks his son invincible, and the fair Alpha showed him scant courtesy to the old boy, and the prince is full of ginger. The people have jollied the young fellow along because he's a pretty boy. Even old Centauri said he was a fine specimen. The remarkable change noted in the wondrous Alpha since your advent has roused universal discussion, and scientists aver she is gradually degenerating to the level of primeval womanhood. Virgilius, you seem foolishly timid. This mystical woman has fascinated you. You forget women have always been your inspiration, and you have yet to meet defeat. You have loved before, and many times as deeply as you do now. This affair is not more serious than others. Lay aside passion for one cold moment. Think, my boy, calmly, soberly. Do not be an ass. Powers above, why don't men cultivate more thought in such emergencies? At any rate, one thing is certain. You return with us. You have to. Friends would think we'd made away with you. We're also handsomely provided for in your will. What a peck of trouble you're giving us anyhow, he snapped, suddenly grown irritable. You act like a pup. Ah, let him remain and be damned, bawled Saunders. I gesticulated impatiently, trying to speak, but Saunders, crabbed, peppery little Saunders, would hear nothing. His voice squeaked high with temper. Let him remain, I say. Don't waste time over him. We're not going yet, so let him marry this wonderful creature, and I'll warrant he'll soon be in more haste to depart than we. Say, friends, let the boy alone, laughingly cried Saxe, coming to my rescue. Let him enjoy all the happiness possible out of the affair. He and I will discuss later our departure. Virgilius was always a favorite of folly. We'll talk this matter over again. Meantime, be merry. I laughed happily, not heeding the chorus of caustic remarks hurled at me from Sheldon and Saunders. Nothing at that moment could dampen my ardor. I was wild, triumphant, and even attempted repartee, always a hazardous undertaking with my witty friends. We all became unusually gay, and Sheldon roared a giddy song, which was fortunately terminated by the entrance of Mike. He served us with light wines and viands, and regaled our curiosity concerning the vast preparations going on below. We learned, though the Vespa boy had been in Center over a fortnight, Alpha Centauri's greeting would be his first official welcome. Old Centauri returned with us last night, Sheldon told me. The prince was notified the priestess of the sun had returned, and he wanted to accompany us back to the city, but was advised to remain and view the Ottega, as possibly the queenly young woman would not give him an audience for several days. It is believed he will visit the Potolili and Octragona camps, both chiefs having, on separate occasions, been guests of old Ben Leal. But I think the young fellow will slip the dusky ones in his anxiety to inspect the female Centauri. I'm positive he'll reach the city before midnight. We're included in the feast, eh, Mike? Mike nodded vigorously and ordered his 3 assistants to work, then tackled me. And while the ordeal of rejuvenation was taking place, I dispatched a messenger to ascertain when it would be convenient for Alpha to receive me. Her reply was verbal, brief, and disappointing as usual. Plans had been changed. The prince had not been expected to return to the city for several days, but now would arrive at any moment. I would find her in the reception rooms. Would I please hurry to her? We hustled and were soon ready to descend. Mike was disappointed with us. He thought the handsome costume of Centauri was more suitable for the occasion, but we couldn't see it. He followed us dismally. We jarred his artistic nerves. Poor fellow. End of section 22.
Section 23 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 20. The brilliant rainbow salon was crowded. Sweet, weird Centauri music accompanied the hum of voices, and the fragrance of rare, strange blossoms filled the air. My 3 comrades mingled with the people, and I hurried down the long vista of glistening columns and lights to where Alpha Centauri stood greeting her guests. God, how marvelously beautiful the woman was! In an instant I was beside her, and tremblingly addressed her. Her great eyes flashed into mine. Her smile scattered reason. I suppose I acted idiotic. It was natural, most men would. She laughed gently, and, taking my arm, told me I was a dear, foolish boy. There was affection in her voice, love in her eyes. The worshipped ideal was deserted. She had discovered man. I was victorious. The circle surrounding us thinned. People departed with smiling faces, leaving us alone to whisper sweet nonsense. Happy? Yes. Too happy in a world of our own. She was gloriously, ideally beautiful tonight. Gorgeously garbed in a shimmering robe of chameleon tint, lavishly studded with gems. Neck, shoulders, arms were literally concealed beneath flashing orders and ornaments, while the luxuriant midnight tresses rippled the length of her form. Yet upon her head rested the little gold cap with raised border of forked gold, emblem of the sun. She still considered herself priestess of the sun, and gloried in that dull bit of gold on her head, the only woman in the wide world crowned with the flaming emblem. Yet if she wedded, she would be forced to relinquish it, and even now it was whispered she had renounced her religion. For me. Fate timed, yet threw a glamour of confidence and security over my fool's paradise, that the end would be more deadly cruel. Her hand rested lightly in mine. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "come. I must see you alone, away from everybody, all to myself. We shall arrange for the future." "Alpha," I murmured, but her attention was attracted from me, and I forgot what I was going to say in the excitement that followed. Her hand slipped from mine, and she moved away, then stood erect in an attitude of expectancy. From the gardens came the sound of trumpets and cheers. Again and again, above the noise and tumult, were borne the words, "Hooray! Hooray! Long live the Vespa Prince!" The most intense excitement prevailed. The whole of Centaur seemed in an uproar. Those in the salon flocked to the vestibule and balconies, echoing the shouts from without. And through it all, Alpha remained cool, stately, the only calm, collected being in all that assemblage. Into the great hall rushed the hubbub, the air filling with crashing, deafening, joyful music. Laughter and song greeted the great man, and those collected to welcome him yelled, mad with enthusiasm. Alpha Centauri's eyes were riveted upon the main entrance. I stood close behind her, but was forgotten. A man entered, followed by a group of gay young sports. But the man, this one commanded the attention of all. Of gigantic physique, he towered above all men, fair as a god, face fresh and rosy, with close-cropped golden curls. Way was made for him, the guests forming into 2 obsequious lines. He strode forward, his gleaming, sultry eyes hurriedly scanning the faces of all. Then they rested upon the lovely woman at my side. He threw up his arm, and his eyes flashed wide with amazement. Then over his face spread a smile of wild delight, and he halted, marveling at her loveliness. A low exclamation made me turn. She was bending forward, hands tightly clasped, her sweet face white with emotion, and dilated eyes raised, enthralled by the burning blue orbs fixed upon her. "Soul, soul," she murmured, "soul, soul." She pressed her hand over her eyes and brow, and with the action her senses returned. With drooping eyes and lovely flushed face, she advanced to meet this man who was born a conqueror. He hastened to her and caught both her hands. She murmured something, and he sank to his knee, pressing his lips upon the hard brilliance hemming her gown. She turned slightly. He sprang to his feet, clutching her lovely bare arm, and drew her close. He whispered eagerly, passionately, and Alpha gazed at him dazed, fascinated. She realized her ideal. She had met her affinity. He led her to the forest of strange tropical plants, whose branches housed hundreds of drowsy songsters, drugged with the sweet, pungent odors from the voluptuously undulating fountain. These two will wander in this paradise of love, his arms clasped about her, whispering words of adoration, while she listens intoxicated, wildly, deliriously happy in her earthly heaven. I watched them pass down the moss-covered path, till the thick foliage of strange spices hid them from view. Then I realized. Numbed, chilled, I turned away, every thought swallowed in great physical pain. A hand of iron clutched my heart and wrung it dry as a sponge. I had a vague idea of falling, not suddenly, but gradually, easily. Of many people hurrying to me. Then Sax loomed above, and as in a dream came the words, "Courage, courage, my boy! Be a man! Help, help!" he shouted in tones that pierced my brain. Then borne to me vividly, yet as though thousands of miles away. Heavens, how the woman deceived us all! And my last flickering thought before blank was she had deceived no one, least of all myself. In the garden, full length upon the lawn, the sweet, cool air revived me, but not for an instant had I lost consciousness. My friends were about me, anxious, grave. Distinctly I heard Sax mutter, "We must get out of this and quick. Can't have the boy carrying on this way." I remained silent, rather comfortable than otherwise, dreamily wondering what the row was about. Then, like a flash, I knew, and a dull, heavy, sickening feeling gripped my whole mind. To escape the hell's torment of memory, I would have given life. Oblivion, yes, if I could never have realized. Now, God, all the little tantalizing delights, the sweet doubts vanishing in happy possession I was so sure of, all was over. Who could have foreseen such an end? The very peculiarities of this woman forbade such a finale. Instead, all would have expected this stately, high-souled, devout creature to renounce mankind, remaining true to her deity, secluded to bask forever in the warm rays of the fiery god she worshipped. Oh, if I could have remembered her always as the priestess of the sun! To have renounced the wonderful, mystical being I discovered. I mourned for the beautiful ideal, shattered by the woman. Though fashioned by a master's hand, the delicate veneer revealed the commonplace at the first test. The idealist's mist blinds all eyes. And she had done as the whole world of women have ever done, surrendered at the first flash of a pair of handsome eyes and sensitive red lips. Ah, Alpha Centauri. I mourn for the romance. Bah! I have no passion for the woman. I rolled in the cool green moisture, moaning aloud my misery. Someone attempted sympathy. I sprang up, pushing him aside. None of that, I told them roughly. Saunders' prophecy has come true. I am anxious for departure. The sooner now the better. I left them. How could they console me for the beautiful astral thing that had passed out of my soul? I was fond of them, yes, but what a deadly disgust I felt for all things. Sheldon followed me and drew my arm within his. He said nothing, but I understood his deep sympathy, far different from that usually extended by those who cruelly select the most inopportune moment for reminder, and all through distaste to witness suffering embarrassingly mouth stupid, meaningless warnings. My unhappiness caused Sheldon sincere pain. I held out for a second, haughty in my misery. Then my head dropped to his shoulder as a choking sob escaped me. He had led me far away from the brilliant palace, blazing lights and gay music, away from the maddening sound of laughter, far, far to the outskirts of the city. And Sheldon talked, evenly, monotonously, and vaguely I understood that in a marvelous, cool, and dispassionate manner, he was telling me the romance of his life. All men have one and live. My own grief was too vividly fresh for me to follow him entirely. But Sheldon's sorrow was caused by the knowledge that the woman he adored had never been happy. His romance was ordinary and occurred when he was very young, or it wouldn't have happened. They had been separated by lack of funds and a scheming mother, and both learned all about it when it was too late. She had made a very good wife for the wrong man, and had been in her grave these 20 years. And with a deep sigh, poor old Sheldon handed me an old-fashioned locket, and I gazed upon a girl with a round, fresh face, saucer eyes, and ringlets. He loved as I, not the woman, but the ideal, and had been true because he never possessed. He would mourn forever for this moon-faced chit, who, if she were to confront the matured Sheldon of today, would not rouse even interest. We tramped the livelong night, returning to the palace when the sky flushed red with the rising sun. Hilarity had deserted the palace. The stillness of wan fatigue reigned, and surrounding all was that stale, dissipated atmosphere, the aftermath of an orgy. The lights were still burning in the spacious salon, and the crystal floor was strewn with wilted flowers, smothering and dying in their own sickening sweet, poisonous odor. The banquet tables flickered in gorgeous disarray, their rich scarves stained with the wine that had flowed freely. The pungent odor mingled with that of stale fruit and dying flowers. I turned from it all with loathing, and Sheldon hurried me to our apartments. Sachs and Saunders groaned with indigestion in their deep sleep of wine. Our entrance did not disturb them. As though I were a child, Sheldon prepared me for rest, then hovered at my side and talked. My limbs stiffened with weariness. My brain ached and wandered. Then finally... End of section 23. Section 24 of the Centaurians. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Centaurians by Biagi. Chapter 21. Disappointment is destiny. the grim inevitable to climax every ambition and season the soul with reason. Disappointment spares this world of imbeciles. And I, for all my wealth, became a man afflicted with a grand disappointment, just a swirling atom in this planet of passion. The room was flooded with yellow sunlight. After all, it was a good, cozy old world. And why was I complaining when, for the first time in my life, I realized just what I expected only spoiled the good effect by trying to tease myself into false security? My 3 friends watched me slyly, though engaged in their usual discussion. Sheldon and Saunders had returned to their old disputes. Sax was trying to make peace, and once more did I feel the usual inclination to sick the 2 old boys on. I joined them, and was soon drawn into the melee. Sax expostulated, and I discovered I could still laugh. Mike's entrance ended the row. He informed me Alpha Centauri wished to see me at once. It occurred to me I was no longer at the beck and call of this woman who had killed the beautiful, the poetical in me, and I replied, I would follow shortly. Mike stared, and possibly fancied some disrespect to the superb Centaurian, and he could fancy what he damned please. We have arranged to depart in 10 days, Sax informed me. Couldn't possibly manage it sooner. And the world can explode in that time, muttered Sheldon. But it won't, snapped Sax. We are starting a month earlier than expected. Has it occurred to you, boys, that lacking a few months, the 7 years of absence are nearly up? I think we will just about catch the last vessel. And now that we are really going, the Centaurians want us to remain. They have warned me of all manner of dangers, and emphasized the fact that owing to volcanic origin, etc., the ice regions are constantly changing form, and that possibly we would encounter a vast frozen ocean whose waves were insurmountable ice mountains, where formerly were barren valleys and cliffs. I replied we were forced to overcome all obstacles as our return to our own country was imperative. They consider us a brave quartet. One man particularly regretted our hastened departure, as he is perfecting an instrument which would establish communication between the 2 hemispheres, and he wished to present one to me for experiment. He has promised me the plan. From descriptions, I think it is all wrong. I can improve upon it, but it would be wonderful if we could communicate with these people from our side. They want us to remain among them the worst way, however, and urged with every argument, finally declaring our people had long ago given us up, and no benefit ever came from resurrection. Nonsense, Sax, I bawled. You're hinting to remain. If I'm obliged to go alone, I will get out of this cursed place, and quick. I detest Centauri. There, he answered soothingly. I am more anxious to go than you. Merely wished to test. And your game. Guess the latest phase the Centaurians have taken regarding us. The Vespa Prince is responsible for it. Out with it, I laughed. I'm going to worry him some before I go anyway. This wise prince says we're not from any strange land. We're Vespas, Sax informed us. He declares the earth is round, ahem, and that the Vespa belt, and incidentally Centauri, comprise the whole globe. He claims that only one horn of his famous crescent is visible. The other is the foundation of the great ice regions, and extends beyond the pole. The land there is the Vespa belt. He's about as wise as some of the smarties on our side, who insist the whole world is explored when they've toured the 5 little continents. The prince thinks it's just possible we may have come from the extended horn of his little old crescent, but doubts it, and thinks it's more likely we're merely 4 clever adventurers from one of the large cities of his dominion. Now what do you think of that, Salucci? 4 adventurous hornets, roared Sheldon. Hornets, by George, echoed Saunders. I was astonished, but joined in the yells that followed an inelegant remark from Sheldon, who rarely missed an opportunity, and Saunders helped him out with the same kind of thing. I took my turn, and the buffooned Vespa Prince was guyed unmercifully. The 4 strayed hornets were making an awful din when Mike marched in, silencing us with his gravity and dignity. He disapproved of our boisterousness, and came to remind me I must see Alpha Centauri. Sheldon had his fling at him also, and Saunders gave his snicker that exasperated all who heard it, and caused Sachs to raise his hands as though the fun had gone far enough. I shall have to see her, I murmured nervously. She sent for me over an hour ago. It will have to take place. It might as well be now. Not much, cried Sheldon. I would avoid it. What do you suppose she has to say? I bet 10 to 1, boys, I have the whole interview in a nutshell. Sally, reproachful. The left man always is. I wonder why. And she will whine and simper and regret and want him to hang around to see how happy she can be with the other fellow. Same old affair, same old woman, no scarcity of 'em. What did he come over here for? Sachs glanced sternly and hushed him up. Go, my boy, he told me, but cut it short. Make it the last time. End everything now. Don't permit her to play with you further. She did not play with me, I interrupted. As far as she is concerned, everything was... All right, he hurriedly replied. Then you played with her, which is the same thing. Be firm. Make it the last meeting. Sachs, you don't understand, I explained. When I joined the expedition, it was to seek a madly adored ideal. I found a woman, and still seek. The ideal has no rival. I am true, faithful to my creation. Alpha Centauri never was divine. Her beauty pales before the gorgeousness of my ideal. The lovelorn Virgilius is dead. It is the same old Salucci itching for a new sensation. I followed Mike. He regarded me curiously. Alpha Centauri is grieved at your delay, he remarked. I shrugged my shoulders, astonished at my indifference, but sighed deeply as I saluted the exquisite creature reclining upon a skin-covered couch with a background of huge white blossoms, whose heavy fragrance consumed the air. She arose, watching me doubtfully, hesitatingly. I hurried to her and caught her hands tightly. The witchery of her eyes was upon me. Alpha, I murmured. Yes, she replied. I know. Ah, if it had only been Virgilius. I dropped her hands. Do not reproach me, she pleaded. I love as you have taught me. I've learned the lesson well. The image claims me in the form of the Vespa Prince. Benlial, Benlial, brings immortality. I am for eternity the Alpha who united the white races. In less than a century, the Vespa race is extinct, mentioned as history, submerged by the powerful Centauries. Fate mocks, linking me to a people whom formerly I ridiculed, scorned, yet I would not have it otherwise. I adore my prince. Love brought immortality, yet I would renounce both if once again I could be the Alpha of soul. I existed in a divine atmosphere, gazed upon with awe. I basked joyously in the glorious golden light of my spiritual grandeur. Priestess of the Sun has passed away forever. Immortality is the reward for undying regret. Virgilius, you have made me a woman, given me a conscience, a heart throbbing with exquisite passion. But in creating me, you neglected fate, yet you gave me life, and I am yours. I stared at her. This marvelous woman, in her folly, defied even fate. Then I knelt before Alpha Centauri in reverence of her grand, almost divine nature. I would be a monster to permit the sacrifice, I murmured. Do not mar the perfection of my creation. Be happy, joyous, bright as the golden rays of the god you worship. May you exist always in the brilliant dream of the present. In 10 days, I leave Centauri forever." She drew in her breath sharply, then clung to me, alarmed. "We can never part," she whispered. "Virgilius, I have been blind." I did not question her nearsightedness, but gazed rapturously into the sorrowful eyes, then passionately kissed her lips. But I knew. God, I knew. She spoke without reason that was in the keeping of the Vespa Prince. But her love glances made me reckless. The moment absorbed me. I forgot Sax, everybody, and had but one thought: possession. I crushed her to me, ranting madly in my passion. The sweet eyes drooped, and the lovely face flushed beneath my ardor. Suddenly she stood erect, as though listening. Then, with a startled exclamation, sprang from me. In that instant, the whole universe seemed to come between us. Then I perceived Mike's ugly head thrust between the hangings at the entrance. Mike, unruffled, seeing all with sightless eyes. Before he could speak, a powerful white hand clutched and pushed him aside, and the Vespa Prince strode into the room. He gave me a sharp, scrutinizing glance, then hurried to Alpha. And I, looking at him in the full light of day, marveled at his godlike strength and beauty. He was the substance, I the shadow. Physically, mentally, he was a force beyond me. Though I loved her deeply, my ardor was mild compared with his amorous adoration. He loved her, yes, with a mad, crazy desire that destroyed all barriers. And she? Her eyes beamed upon him with wonder and delight. It was joy to her just to have him near her. He clasped her firm, white arm and bent close, whispering eagerly, then led her to the far end of the room. She was completely under his control, and he exulted in his power. He was wildly enamored, but he was master. I had been her slave. She pitied, regretted me. But the Vespa Prince was all the world to her. Absorbed in one another, they had completely forgotten me, and silently I departed. Heavy gloom had apparently settled upon my 3 friends, but they brightened considerably at my return, especially when perceiving my calmness, and I accompanied them to view the instrument that was to speed us over the pole again. During the final days, we were lavishly feted. The Centaurians presented all manner of flattering inducements, and noted orators from all parts of the land came, argued, vainly tempting us to remain among them. They warned us that we had become acclimated, and like the Centaurians would perish when reaching a certain latitude. But we couldn't see it, and I was the most anxious to depart. I thought of my 3 guardians, Middleton and Co., of the scepter-like power my wealth influenced, by eminence in my own world, and maybe it was not altogether my wealth beauty desired. My life had been marred. Cynicism, the brilliant, cruel blossom of gold, had blinded me from the cradle to the purity of nature. The ideal never possessed, still charmed. Far above the earthly she lured, ever fair and true, unattainable. Alpha Centauri realized the image of my brain, but the living, tangible woman dispelled the charm, and I awoke with a shock, yet rapturous that the ideal still existed. And I knew once out of this cursed country, away from the strangely fascinating woman who bore its name, that even regret would cease, and again would I be the free, careless Salucci, fleeing from one idea to another, fickle but comfortable. Centauri and I never met again in private. She always had a fond, regretful glance and lingering hand pressure. But she did not seek to see me alone, and I did not ask her. We had parted with a sweet embrace, and I would leave her happy with her prince and immortality. The day finally arrived. At noon we sailed forever from this strange, glorious land. Already Centauri and its people seemed of the past, and would soon become faint, formless, in the soothing haze of memory. Sax lost trace of me in the pleasures offered by those interested to his craft. Sheldon had been mobbed and captured by the geographical societies, and Saunders had been at the observatory for 3 days past. I was the guest of a fashionable coterie of gay, idle young dandies, who made my last week in their freakish but beautiful world one of revelry. They were to be my escort in the farewell march to the ship, and as midday approached, clustered about me eagerly, intent, apparently, that I should not have an instant for reflection. They flattered, cajoled, and with delicate innuendo made me aware of my immense popularity. Incidentally, I discovered that I was the last of the quartet to remain in the palace, and casually my attention was directed to the great mass of people who, since daybreak, had been swarming into the gardens and streets surrounding the palace, and who now sweltered and jostled impatiently in the intense noon heat. I spied my 2 old literary friends forcing their way through the crowd, and eagerly beckoned, while my gay companions boisterously hailed them. They responded by immediately disappearing beneath the flame-glinting portico, and elbowed their way to my side. Both gentlemen bubbled with fun and witticism, and I learned that my meteor-like visit had been mystically impressive. Also that I was too light for tragedy, too deep for comedy. My forte lay in the enjoyment I could take in both. I was advised to never again attempt any character except myself, and both in chorus implored me to cut out romance altogether. Of course, I joined in the laughter, though hazy to the joke, and while raking my brains for an apt retort, was unconscious of the mischief brewing. I was suddenly seized and hoisted high. In spite of my protests, I was rushed to the vestibule and dumped into a throne of foliage and rainbow blossoms, then borne aloft upon the shoulders of these rascally exquisites of Centaur, began a merry, triumphant march to the ship. People cheered me wildly all along the route, and I yelled myself hoarse, while ladies pelted me with blossoms, and though I flashed bold glances right and left, my mind suddenly shifted from the gay, noisy scene, and I glanced despairingly in the direction of the palace sparkling in the noon sun. Alpha Centauri had not said farewell. Centauri, Centauri. The name rattled through my brain. I turned sick with longing, myth or woman. I craved to see her again. And so befogged my senses became between sweet, forlorn memories, and the tumult around me that as the sudden ear-splitting shriek of a whistle pierced the air, I jumped and nearly fell from my toppling floral throne. Pandemonium reigned as Sax's great machine speeded into view, and he beamed and shouted, waving his cap at the cheering mob, while Sheldon and Saunders stood upon the platform, yelling like Apaches. The engine slackened as it neared the ship, then rushed up the bridge, running the full length of the deck. My 3 comrades appeared suspiciously flustered and anxious as I boarded the ship, and busied constantly about me till we cut from the steel shell and floated upward. Foolish trio. Friends pressed around us, and many were the long hand clasps and good wishes huskily expressed. I was thankful when the bell of warning sounded, and all hurriedly departed. Then, amid wild cheers, the ship slowly rose. The loud whirring, flapping of sail wings almost drowned the good luck called up to us. Higher and still higher we floated. The vast throng below massed and wavered. I leaned dangerously over the railing, yelling, frantically signaling to the people who could no longer see or hear me. Then the ship shifted to a slanting course, darting meteor-like over the deep blue bay of Centaur. Rich, fertile valleys, undulating mountains, thread-like silvery streams flashed, then faded in the blue speed mist as a fabulous poppy scene. And far in the distance, glimmering mystically through the heliotrope pall that shielded her, was the phantom city of Centaur, the white city of delicate fairy spires and domes, and tall, fantastic, glinting sun temples. Beautiful Centaur. The ship soared higher, piercing the swiftly driven wind clouds which enveloped us in a fleecy mist, obscuring forever the marvelous dreamland. A burning flood scorched my eyes. A sickening regret raked my heart. After all, it was a fair, smiling, wondrous country, the Centaurians' friends. God in heaven, if I dared, I would return at once. But Centauri had vanished for all time, and my only consolation was to sigh miserably, though cursing my weakness, and gaze distractedly in the direction of the evanescent city. And this unhappiness, lovesickness, self-pity so engrossed me that I did not hear the soft, stealthy footsteps approaching. My arm was gently clasped. A form leaned lovingly against me, while a low, tremulous voice murmured my name. Startled, incredulous, I turned quickly and met the glorious, fascinating eyes of Alpha Centauri. "You did not forget!" I cried in delight. "I can never forget, Virgilius," she whispered, twining her arm in mine. "I shall accompany you as far north as it is deemed safe." Determined to see the last of us, she had boarded the ship at dawn, long before the crowd collected. The Vespa Prince was aboard also, but clever old Centauri kept that prince in tow, never letting him out of his sight, and for 6 whole days I had Alpha entirely to myself. She was fond of me, very, but she had killed the ideal. The passionate adoration that had caused me such misery was dead. Still, she was the one woman in all the world I had ever really loved, and fickle, light I may be, I could never forget her. I thought my heart would break when parting, and to me it seemed a criminal fate that ordained our lives should be separated. But later I realized it was all for the best. The exalted passion she inspired had vanished, and only exaltation could make love a delight to me. For Sheldon's benefit, we took the route north over the Oxtas, so he could view the magnificent ruins of his great body of fresh water. The Otego was still in eruption. The earth around had dissolved like wax, and half the range was leveled with the country. Miles were buried beneath ashes and lava. 75 miles farther north, we came upon the encampment of the Octrogonus and the Podalilies. The ship lowered, and we spent several hours with the 2 tribes, who were still at war, and still hoped to extinguish each other. Podalili's beautiful daughter was still a prisoner, though Octrogona had wedded her, and Podalili had lost the wife whom Octrogona had claimed as his sister. The Octrogonas openly declared she had been murdered, and the bitter feud waged savagely. Podalili fiercely declared he would extinguish his opponents. He ordered all prisoners slaughtered like cattle. Alpha shuddered. Podalili laughed cynically as he watched her, and said the world would become a moon before the supreme passion, hate, became extinct. Both tribes loaded us with gifts, and each were sincere in wishing us luck. Potterlily declared his race would in time travel beyond the pole and join our people. We bade the warring chiefs farewell. Even the savages of this country had become dear to us. As the atmosphere cleared, rarefied to penetrating distinctness, we could see hundreds of miles ahead. Centauri had passed from us forever. We were up in the snow regions, and far in the distance, like a gigantic shadow resting upon the vast whiteness, was the fearful, barren regions of the pole, tipped by the violet, elusive ice mountains that had led many an explorer to his death. The Centaurians traveling with us suffered intensely from the cold, and had become strangely silent and sad. All dreaded the finale. Alpha's vivaciousness was gone. The sweet face paled before the biting blast of the north. The glorious eyes clouded and drooped with weariness, yet watched my every movement with intense wistfulness. Our last parting was near. The ship gradually sailed nearer the earth. Then a few miles farther north, the order was given to lower. The hour I dreaded had arrived. Alpha, breathing with difficulty, tremblingly clung to my arm. I caressed and tried to soothe her. Sachs, Sheldon, and Saunders entered the propellier. The Centaurians collected around the machine in sorrowful farewell. The ship softly plowed the snow. The bridge was lowered, and we cheered as Sachs put the machine in motion and dashed out into the great white desert. I strode forward with Alpha clinging to me. Suddenly she flung her arms around me and laid her cheek against mine. "Let them go," she murmured. "You must remain. Virgilius, we cannot part. Ah, do not leave me." "Why should he remain?" demanded a voice close beside us. Alpha gasped, but continued to cling to me, and startled we turned to find the Vespa Prince glaring at us with jealous eyes. Beautiful Centauri laughed hysterically, pressing her hands over her eyes as though bewildered. Then she clung to my shoulder, murmuring, "Remain. Do not heed him." "Remain for what?" I whispered, caressing her hair. "For love," she murmured. "For love. It is not too late." The prince moved restlessly. "Be patient," I muttered. "You will have her always. I paved the way." "Nonsense," he retorted. "I could have taught her. So could any man who had the courage. She is not a saint. Just a sweet, warm-hearted woman who grieves at your departure because you came near being mated." "Alpha," he continued, roughly taking her from me. "Look up. Be brave. Make your choice. There is yet time. If it is Virgilius I return to the belt, content that you are happy. If I am the one, say farewell, and let Virgilius depart in peace." She shook her head, then slowly raised her eyes to his compelling glance. He drew her to him. She sighed wearily, and her head sank to his breast. He held out his hand and gripped mine in a parting shake. Without a word, I turned and ran off the ship, which floated upward ere my feet scarcely touched the snow. Centauri leaned dangerously over the railing. Her long black hair floated on the icy breeze, but she was clasped securely in the arms of the Vespa Prince. "Virgilius! Virgilius!" she called, stretching out her arms. "Come back! Ah, Virgilius, come back to me!" Higher rose the ship. "Virgilius!" The name wafted from the clouds. I scarce could see the lovely face. Then something fell. A bright yellow object softly plowed the snow, and my control deserted me as I raised the shining thing. It was the little golden cap she had always worn to keep secret the charm that none but she could see. a huge yellow stone that flashed fire. Alpha Centauri gave up her religion when I passed from her life. To me she had given the sacred emblem of the sun. She and the ship had sailed swiftly away forever, and in despair I shrieked and ran, hoping, hopeless, if further there might be some trace in the sky. Nothing. All gloom and terrifying stillness. The one woman in all the world that I loved was sailing far above the clouds, consoled in the arms of her affinity. This was fate. And all that remained of this wonderful creature was a sweet remembrance and the little emblemic cap with its hidden treasure that only a Centauri dare possess. Centauri, Centauri, my beautiful. The end. End of section 24. End of the Centaurians by Biagi.